you're going to be on in just a second. Good evening and welcome. I'll call this Issaquah City Council work session to order at 6:30 and make a brief announcement that Councilmember Tola Martz is excused this evening. We have 3 items on our agenda. The first is Agenda Bill 6579, Parks, Recreation, Pool, and Natural Area Park Bond Survey Results. The second item is an update on the Klahanie Annexation Study. And our last item is a discussion on Eastside Fire and Rescue funding options. So with our first item, Agenda Bill 6579, Parks, Recreation, Pool, and Natural Area Park Bond Survey, this has been heard by the Services and Safety Committee, and I will turn it over to Councilmember Eileen Barber for a brief introduction, followed by a number of staff presentations and discussion. So with that, Eileen.
Thank you, Fred. This will be a real brief introduction. This is Agenda Bill 6579, which is looking forward to a Parks, Recreation, Pool, and Natural Areas Bond Survey. So this has been looked at. It was last at the Services and Safety on March 11th, and at that it was recommended to bring to full council. This is one of those issues that we felt was very important to get consensus and information to the entire council as opposed to one specific committee. Oftentimes we hear the information, but the rest of the council members don't get the more in-depth conversation and the ability to comment and provide input. So I know Ann and staff is here this evening prepared with another slideshow, and EMS, the organization that also did the research for us in regards to the bond measure, is here for additional questions. So Ann, I'm going to let you start us off.
And we're going to introduce. So I'll just start up here. I'm Andrew Tebow with EMC Research. We conducted the survey. I'm going to walk you through it. We do have a series of key finding slides, which rather than just stand up and read through to you, I'm going to just go through the slides and talk about the findings based on the slides themselves. If you remember, this survey was a total of 600 interviews. We wanted to look both at the city of Issaquah for a parks measure in that geography. We also looked at a wider geography, including the entire Issaquah school district, because we wanted to look at issues around the pool in the wider area. This was done June 14th through 20th, 2012. And the results that you'll see here reflect the demographics of the 2 geographies, the demographics of the city and the demographics of the school district. I'm going to skip right through these and get to the graphs because the pictures tell a lot more than the words. So this is a pretty standard question we ask about general optimism. Do you feel things in the city of Issaquah are generally going in the right direction, or do you feel things have gotten pretty seriously off on the wrong track? This is standard language. This is a question that's asked in polls all across the country in all different jurisdictions. And this was, again, in June of 2012. Right direction at 74% is absolutely astounding. That's a higher number than I've seen anywhere else that we've done this in the state. It's indicative of a population that's very satisfied with the way the city, the direction that the city's headed in. This is probably weighted a little bit more towards economic optimism, but it's also quality of life is tied into all of this. So it's a number you should be very happy with and very proud of. Only 13% saying wrong track. That's incredibly low. Specific job ratings. So we asked these on a scale of excellent, good, only fair, or poor. The excellent and good are considered positive ratings. The only fair or poor are considered negative ratings. So we asked the job Issaquah city government does overall. You can see it's 68% positive. Again, that's a very strong positive rating. Ratings around government, you typically have higher negatives. You have only 23% negative and only 3% saying poor. That's a very low dissatisfaction rate. The next question is even a higher bar, a more difficult ask. The job Issaquah City government does spending your tax dollars responsibly. Any question around spending, around taxes, is a very high hurdle. And to get 57% positive with only 32% negative, and of that only 5% is the poor rating. Again, a very strong rating overall and compared to other cities in the region. The Parks and Rec Department, so the overall job the Parks and Rec Department does, 85% positive, only 8% negative with no poor rating. Parks departments tend to be some of the most popular government institutions because it's one of the areas where almost everybody sees a direct benefit or at least a once removed benefit. So again, a very strong rating. We asked some questions around the condition of various parks facilities. So the overall condition of Issaquah City Parks, 80% positive, only 14% negative. The overall condition of trails, 70% positive, 9% negative. The major difference here is in those who are unable to rate the trails because they don't use them on a regular basis. So it's not that it's more negative, it's just that there are more people who aren't rating the trails. And then the pool, you see that dynamic even highlighted further. So the overall condition of the pool, 18% positive, 27% negative, 56% not sure. Now this negative with 9% saying poor, this is really the first time we've seen any significant negative on any rating that we've seen in the survey this far. So that suggests to me that there is some knowledge out there that the pool is in need of upgrades or repair, that the condition is not ideal. These positive ratings around parks and trails are somewhat of a double-edged sword. Sometimes you get into a situation where people think things are in such good condition that then they don't see the need for additional funds to support those facilities or services. What we'll see later in the survey is that's not the case here, that even though people feel good about the parks and the trails, they're still willing to invest. Funding priorities, we asked a whole series of priorities on a 1 to 7 scale, where 1 is a very low priority and 7 is a very high priority. This shows the 5, 6, and 7, so that's above, the midpoint would be a 4. So these are people saying that these things should be a high priority in terms of parks and rec spending. And the top 3 really are a similar theme: protecting wildlife habitat, preserving natural open space such as forested, creekside, and wetland areas, and acquiring and protecting land around creeks and streams. There's kind of this wildlife open space theme that's consistent through these top 3. And then 4th is repairing the pool to make sure it's up to date and meets safety requirements. Whenever you talk about safety issues around parks, facilities, and elements, those tend to rate higher. And then I'll just read the ones that are above a majority saying that these are priorities. Improving walking, hiking, and biking trails, creating new neighborhood connections, that's walking paths and multi-use trails, making major renovations to the pool, renovating small neighborhood parks, replacing playground equipment and park furniture. And it may look a little odd how these are ranked or ordered. What we do is we rank them by priority, so the percent saying that these are the highest priority, because what that shows is not only am I saying it's a priority, I'm saying it's the highest priority. So you want that sense of intensity. Another way to look at these same things is just to do an average. So across everyone who we talk to on this 1 to 7 scale, what is the average rating? You can see this, the order doesn't really change: protecting wildlife habitat, preserving open space, acquiring and protecting land around creeks and streams. And
Question as we're going through this?
Of course.
You've got 2 different, so the Julie's Bone Pool is up there twice, but it almost sounds like it's the exact same thing to me. So repairing Julie's Bone Pool to make sure it's up to date, and then making major renovations to the pool.
Right. So one is just repairs, and I'll read you the.
Oh,
and then the other is major renovations.
Okay.
So give me a moment here, and I'll read you the exact language. So repairing the pool to make sure it is up to date and meets safety requirements, And then the next one was making major renovations to the pool.
Okay, I see the difference.
So you see the order really is similar. So we asked those priorities before we talk about funding. We asked in this survey about a $10 million bond measure, and we talked about that as an open space, parks, and pool measure that may be on the ballot. Would provide funds to protect water quality in creeks and streams, acquire, develop, and maintain new neighborhood and community parks, including improving athletic fields, and make repairs and limited improvements to the pool to meet safety standards by issuing $10 million of general obligation bonds over 20 years. You can see strong, overwhelming majority of support. So 76% support for a tax measure with only 18% opposition, again, is very strong. And it's particularly strong in the context of what I was talking about earlier, where in general, people think the condition of parks is pretty good. They think the condition of trails is pretty good. There's some question around the pool, but to still get 3/4 to say, look, I want to invest another $10 million in parks, even though I don't think there's a crisis, is a pretty strong endorsement of how high a priority people think this kind of spending is.
And so, Andrew, the $10 million, how did you settle on $10 million as sort of a target figure that you believe is the right figure? Or some would probably say less, and I've heard people actually say we should invest more.
Right.
So how did we come about and settle on $10 million?
So we looked back at a previous survey that you guys had done in 2006, and really the drop-off point for support, where it started to get down to either side of a majority, was in the $65 range, which if you work that backwards into how much it is based on median house value and total assessed value, is in the $10 million range. You also asked last time about a $7.5 million measure, and we, based on the results from that, last time we thought there was some more space. And then there was also a third kind of, just kind of coincidental factor. We looked at the 2011 capital improvement projects, and we looked at that list. And if you look at the first page of that list, you had 26 priorities on just the first page that came out to $31 million. And if you took out major pool facility renovation at $21 million, that got you back to $10 million. So we were going to ask later about major renovation. And so we thought, take that piece out. You know, all these factors coming together, 10 million seemed to be a good place. We had to choose some number. And regardless of the number you choose, you can learn about more than just that number by the level and intensity of support. What we almost always do is we ask a second question of those who are initially opposed or undecided and say, you know, if it were less, if it were half, would you support it? So that's how we came to the $10 million number.
And so you took into consideration, you know, our previous survey, but you also looked at our the priorities in our capital improvement plan and what had been identified as potential projects that might make up a bond package, or where there had been some interest in those projects.
Yeah, it's you know, the past data on tolerance levels and then looking at what the council's priorities were.
Okay.
And so we did ask that follow-up question about, so the next thing we typically do in these surveys is we say, based on the median home value, this would cost the average homeowner X dollars per year, and that worked out to about $60 per year for this particular bond measure. And what we want to see here is, when you translate $10 million into actual what it might cost you, how does that impact support? And what you see is, statistically, there's no difference in overall support. And just going back and forth between these two slides, what happens is the strongly support goes from 32 to 40. So what's happening here is people are saying, I support this. These investments are something that's important to me. And so when you tell me $10 million for these things, that I support that, 3/4 of residents do. And then when you say, by the way, it's costing the average homeowner $60 a year, what they're saying is, that seems like a pretty good deal for what you're telling me about. Support does not go down. It stays the same overall, but it becomes more intense. That's always a good sign. What that tells you is average price is not an issue, and in fact is a positive.
And so I know there's been some discussion about the projects that were included in the agenda bill that Services and Safety looked at. Are those, Ann, do you want to comment on, are those the right, sort of the right projects based on your assessment of where we're at?
Well, what we were asked last time, Fred, was to come back with another list based on input from council. Because the last time there were 2 skateboard parks, if you recall, and we felt that there was a trend amongst council members to get down to 1 skateboard park. And then we were asked, well, if 1 skateboard park went away, what would you do with the other $350,000? So later on, during Brian's presentation, we
Gonna
have some
talk
other
about
ideas
some of those other
about that.
options.
But they're strictly ideas because we also want to hear from you, we want to hear from our park board next Monday, and we want to hear from the audience.
Great. Thanks, Ann.
Sure.
Paul?
So with this particular question, average cost of $60 a year, any assumption of whether or not the respondent is aware of the a current assessment for an existing bond that they were already paying? Any sense that they were aware of that this would be truly new and added on? It would be in addition to an existing assessment that they had for the existing park bond?
So we talk about in the initial question, and levy annual excess property taxes to repay the bonds. And here in the initial question, we try to stay as close to the language as it typically is. Now, there isn't a ballot measure for this yet. You guys are still talking about what you're going to do. But this pretty closely mimics the language that you would vote on. And so that's the information that people have when they're making this choice. And when we actually talk about this cost the average homeowner with a $420,000 home about $60 a year, that is not information that's on the ballot. What you have is the ballot language, and I make my choice based on that. So this is additional information. As far as if they're interpreting this as something they're already paying or whether it's new, I mean, I feel like it's clear in the ballot language plus the follow-on that this is additional money that we're asking them for. I guess it is possible that someone might think it was just reallocating.
Could you go back to the ballot language one, if you may call it that? So it's, point out to me where it says,
By issuing $10 million of general obligation bonds maturing within 20 years and levy annual excess property taxes to repay the bonds. So when you have a levy, you have a mill rate. When you have a bond, you don't. You talk about the $10 million overall, and that's what voters see.
okay, so all of that language is really just encompasses this potential proposal.
Yes.
The fact that the city currently, there is a rate that people are paying based on property taxes for a previous bond.
Right.
That's not in the scope of this at all.
No, and that's also, yeah, we don't say like, right now you're paying this much to the city, this much to the county, but this is the context in which people vote on these things as well. They don't have, if they choose to know that, find out that additional information, then they'll have it. If they don't, it's not part of the voter's pamphlet or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
So we also asked a follow-up where we, on a $5 million measure, and this was just asked of those who opposed or were unsure. So we had 24% who either said I was against the $10 million or I'm undecided. We asked those, well, what if it were $5 million and it wouldn't have any funds for the pool? What you see there is you get an additional 8 percentage points of support on top of the 76. 76 is already an incredibly strong number. I don't know of many tax measures that get 84% support, maybe EMS levies. We then gave residents some additional information about city parks funding. and just wanted to know how important that information was to them personally. So we talked about the pool being over 40 years old and that it needed to be fully renovated, seismic upgrading, ADA compliance, improving energy efficiency. 67% said that was important information to them, and you can see, again, I want to focus on this idea of intensity. These are both at 67% important, but this one has much greater intensity, and that just means that message resonates with people a little more strongly than the other message. The budget provides funding for ongoing service levels and existing parks facilities, not for major capital improvements. If we don't plan for now for a growing population, by investing in our parks and recreation system, the Parks Department will not be able to meet increased demand. So 2/3 thought that was important information for them to know. The park system currently has major unfunded capital projects like renovations, land acquisition, and new parks and rec facilities. A majority thought that was important to know, although not the same intensity or overall importance as the other two. And then once people know this information, we ask them again, having heard a little bit more about the city's current revenue situation, do you support or oppose? And again, this is the $10 million measure, and you can see the information. Although people thought it was important to know, most people already have an opinion on this measure one way or the other. They're either for it or against it. There's very little don't know. So that additional information didn't change many minds. We also wanted to make the point that there are reasons not to increase taxes as well as things that need to be funded. And so we read a statement that said, some people have said this is the wrong time to consider increasing taxes for our parks. They say in this economy we just can't afford to pay more for parks when we already need more money for basic services like schools, roads, and police and fire. They say the city needs to find a way to make do with what they've got, just like everyone else. So we wanted to give people permission to say no, right? There's other things that are more important, and police and fire are pretty powerful incentives to compete with, or programs to compete with. And you'd see, again, the opinion here is pretty rock solid. It's steady, and we have a graph that shows each time we ask this vote question throughout the survey, statistically speaking, there's no statistical difference in the support levels. We saw the intensity, the strong support move around a little bit, but the overall support, 3/4 say this is something I support. Whether you tell me reasons to support or you tell me reasons that it might not be the right time for taxes, 3/4 are still saying we support it. Opposition increases a little bit, but again, even at its highest point at 24%, that's a low level of opposition for a tax measure. We asked some questions in the wider school district. The questions you've seen earlier were just of the city residents. These are school district residents. So we said the pool is open to residents throughout the area, and many users come from outside the city. Right now, the pool is entirely supported by the city taxpayers. Would you support or oppose expanding the taxing area for the pool to include all residents within the school district boundaries instead of just those within the city boundaries? So if you look at the district as a whole, 67% support expanding the boundaries. If you look at inside the city versus outside the city, there's a clear difference. People inside the city overwhelmingly support expanding the district. I think that makes a lot of sense. But even outside the city where they're not currently paying to support the pool, you have 61% saying, yeah, okay, that makes sense, and 32% opposed. There's not a lot of intensity in the support outside the city, but again, you're asking people to put themselves into a new taxing district, which is always a really hard ask. And so 61% support for that outside the city is, again, strong in the context. We wanted to ask, so the $21 million from the CIP for major pool renovations, we wanted to ask that $21 million in the school district, the whole district. So the question read, what if a tax measure for the pool were on the ballot in the school district? Would provide funds for a major renovation of the pool to extend its useful life, lower energy costs, and make the facility earthquake safe. Fund expansion of the pool to serve an increased population of families, competitive and recreational swimmers, and seniors by issuing $21 million of general obligation bonds maturing within 20 years, and levy annual excess property taxes to repay the bond. So district-wide, there was 63% support for that $21 million bond. It was 74% inside the city and 59% outside the city. And remember, at this point, folks outside the city know for a fact, because we told them, that they do not pay anything to support the pool now. So this is them going, not just paying an additional, a surcharge for the pool, it's going from zero to being part of this $21 million bond, and there's 59% support. Again, intensity is low, but you would expect that given it's an entirely new tax. We talked about average cost per year, just as we did with the $10 million bond, and you can see support actually jumps up a little bit. So again, the way we interpret that is, you have a majority, 59 or 63%, saying this is a good idea, yes, I support it, and then you tell them how much it might cost the average homeowner, and they say that seems like a good deal. That cost seems reasonable for what you're telling me about. Opening Lake Sammamish to business. So in order to increase revenue for improvements at Lake Sammamish State Park, some people have suggested allowing more business activity in the park with things like building a lodge, restaurants, equipment rentals, concert performances, and special events. Would you support or oppose allowing more business activity within the lake? And this is the district-wide against school district. 3/4 support, only 21% oppose. Very low, don't know. So overwhelming support for that idea. Visitation, we asked a few quick questions about using pools and parks. So the pool you can see within the city and outside the city, really 8 and 10 rarely or never use the pool, and that's why when we asked that question about rating the condition of the pool, you had a lot of people unable to rate the condition of the pool because they don't use it that frequently. Use inside the city and outside the city is not that different, 22% and 20%. Use of Issaquah parks and trails, 81% say regularly or occasionally within the city, and 73% outside the city, so high use outside the city there as well. Lake Sammamish State Park, pretty much identical, 57 and 55 inside and outside the city regularly or occasionally used. So decent usage, and that's why with parks measures, again, there are a lot of people who see a direct benefit to themselves or their family, and that's why you see 75% support. It's also because there's a tremendous amount of trust in city government in Issaquah. If you look at the right direction, wrong track numbers, if you look at the job ratings for the city itself, for how it spends tax dollars, if you look at the ratings of the Parks Department, all of these things are in place where people feel like if they're going to give the government or the Parks Department more money, they trust that it will be used well because it has been in the past, and they're satisfied with how it's been used.
Thank you, Andrew. I know we only have an hour, Fred, so there's a couple of other reports that I'd like to get to. So if we can keep Andrew here, if you want to go back and ask us some questions.
Great.
And then, Apuzano. So Brian, you have a little information for us?
Yeah, well, Margaret's going to start us out.
Oh, Margaret, okay.
And then you get me, and then you get to finish with Rick.
Rick,
If that's
yes.
okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
And then Ann for a little,
Anything you want to ask me?
okay.
I'm here for the tough questions.
Hi, I'm Margaret McLeod with the Parks Department, and just going over quickly a presentation, and you've seen most of these slides previously when we presented to the City Council, but we just wanted to go over them again real quickly. It's the proposed 2013 Conservation Finance Park Bond. And I just wanted to go over our 2006 park bond that was for $6.25 million, and that we had creekside and uplands open space acquisitions and sports field improvements, neighborhood park at Tallis, which is actually the Harvey Manning Park, as well as playground improvements at Veterans Memorial Field. Those have all been completed. And we are currently doing our Phase 1 in Issaquah Creek Confluence Parks area project, and that should be completed by next month. And here's some photos that we have of our completed projects. This upper photo is of the 2 synthetic turf fields that were built as part of Central Park Pad 3. And you see both, we have soccer as well as lacrosse playing on those synthetic turf fields. And then we did build Harvey Manning Park at the Talus. And then this is the children's play construction that we did at Veterans Memorial Field. And we also wanted to talk about how we leveraged funds. And for Central Park Pad 3, the synthetic turf fields, we're able to leverage our park bond and park mitigation funds by having a King County Youth Sports Field grant of $50,000, as well as the Recreation Conservation Office, Washington Wildlife Recreation Program, local parks category funding of $500,000, and then also the Issaquah Soccer Club donated $100,000. So we were able to leverage park bond monies by $650,000. And then also just wanted to quickly go over our Phase 1 construction at Confluence Parks, which is composed of Sybil Madeline Park, Tully Anderson Park, Issaquah Creek Park, as well as the park maintenance facilities. But for Phase 1, we have our trails and entrance area, a children's play area, our community garden, the public restroom, as well as the new picnic shelter that has been constructed. And also in our open space acquisitions, we acquired Inge Johnson Park right on Issaquah Creek. We added another property to the South Issaquah Creek Greenway. We also acquired the McCary Woods, which is up on Squawk Mountain between Squawk Mountain State Park and some other city-owned property, the Talus at Open Space Natural Area. Also acquired Tully Anderson Park, which is part of the Confluence Parks areas, as well as partial funding for Cora Park, which is on the East Fork of Issaquah Creek. And again, wanted to show how we were able to leverage park bond monies through King County Conservation Future Tax Levy monies, as well as Recreation Conservation Office, Washington Wildlife Recreation Program funding for almost all the park acquisitions except for the Stieglitz property. And now I will turn everything over to Brian.
Please forgive me if I'm a little glazed. I was spent the whole day out at the King County Superior Court participating in the jury duty process. It was good. I was selected. This is just a reminder to just give everybody a reminder of sort of what was on the table last time we talked. And I'll remind everybody too that draft is an operative word here that we have. I think Ann said it best. We're excited to hear the feedback that we get from the public and from the council and everybody with regards to what where we're going to move forward on this. We also gave the reasoning behind how these sort of came to be, but they're not held tightly and anything's available and open. Just a quick reminder: we had $5 million for the pool renovation and improvements, $2 million for the parks and open space land acquisitions. We had the park development for $1.525, which included 2 skate parks. I will explain that little asterisk and options in a second. Replace playground at Gibson Park, replace the playground at Merewood Park, playground at Central Park synthetic turf fields, picnic shelter at Central Park synthetic turf fields, and bleachers at Central Park synthetic turf fields. Those last 3 items would be a completion of a project that was started a number of years ago when we turfed those fields and then got the parking lot. This would complete the project in its entirety. This is just a continuation of what was on that table. Sport field improvements for $1.475. That's lighting at Tibbetts Valley Park. That's redoing the lighting on Field 3 and putting lights on 2, 3, and 4 for $800,000. Field drainage at Tibbetts Valley Park and the Community Center Green for $200,000. And then grass turf field at Central Park Pad 4 for a grand total of Conservation Finance Park bond for $10 million. We have, the park board will be reviewing this on the 20th of this month, at which time they'll be making a recommendation to the mayor regarding their, support for which items. These are options that were put together. By no means are they exhaustive. We heard some feedback. Like I said, if you notice the skate parks, we mentioned the skate park and the turfing of pad 4. Those two items are, and grass turf on pad 4, I should say. But looking at those two items, we had, those were two items that I think in a number of different venues came around as being sort of questionable, that people were like, well, we don't really necessarily see maybe why or why not. So we just threw out the idea of, well, if we took, that could be a potential $350,000 not put into a skate park. And pad 4 development was, what was that number? That was another, 475, thank you, for a total of $825,000 that could be used in some other capacity. Once again, these are just some options. There's numerous available. Option, that first one right there, which is Central Park Pad 1 synthetic turf field. An option would be to work toward putting synthetic turf on field 1 up in the Issaquah Highlands. There's much needed use for athletic fields. On that field, you could have a full-size multi-use field overlaid with a full-size baseball field. That would increase a lot of usability up there. We already have that kind of use up there, and it's a very, very busy park as is. Another option would be to increase parks and open space land acquisitions. As we mentioned before, there's a lot of leveraging that can be done with the monies that we attribute to that. So that, that $825,000 could go towards that. Or it could go to increase pool renovations and improvements, maybe try to create some additional recreational amenities. The $5 million is working a lot on the operational stuff. There might be some opportunities with a little extra funding to actually create some recreational opportunities that might make it a little bit more fun and add some extra amenities. And then another thing was brought up was developing of Hillside Park. Making that park a little bit more usable and just more of a draw. 'Cause it's sort of a hidden treasure. If you haven't been there, it is a beautiful little park, and creating an opportunity for more people to get in and use that.
Brian?
Yeah.
So on the original was a recommendation to develop Central Park Pad 4 to grass, and now I'm seeing one for synthetic turf. Is there a value from one to the other? I know we get more playtime out of synthetic, but why totally eliminate Pad 4 from development?
It's just an option we threw out there. Like I said, we hold tightly to none of it, Eileen. If they want to put the turf, it's just an idea.
Would we have more playability on the synthetic turf? Is that accurate?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
so we
and
could get more play hours, more soccer, more lacrosse, more,
lots more.
okay.
And just to be clear, the 825 would by no means do that whole project. That would be a good start, is what that would be for turfing that, for putting synthetic turf onto that. Now, the soccer club has approached us too, and actually recently, about wanting to do that as well. So we would look into partnerships, leveraging funding for the sports field. If we were to go down that road, there's a lot of opportunities I think we could seek out.
What's the cost to a synthetic turf on a pad?
I knew you're
At
going
what
to,
point?
that one, yeah, you're going to ask that question. It's a larger pad, so it's not just one field. If I had to take a random Brian Burnson guess, and I'll take it all on me, I'd say around 1.5, because you got an overlaid baseball field. It's going to be a little larger than you'd have a multi-use field with some extra warm-up area and a baseball field overlaid on it. So it's not just one field. You can do a lot on that pad and make it very, very usable.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And like I say, the other options truly are endless.
And so with endless options and where we are in the process, what opportunities will the public have to, again, weigh in on ideas that they might have or opportunities to identify options that they believe ought to be included?
Yeah.
Now, I heard that on May the 20th, the Parks Board which has not provided a recommendation yet to the administration on what they believe ought to be in the package. What additional opportunities does someone sitting at home right now watching this, and how do they share that with us?
Yeah, that's a great question, Fred. people can always contact us directly through our city's website, which some have already. We've had a couple opportunities. Like I said, we created these options based on some feedback and input we've already had. The May 20th is a great opportunity to come out and speak, because we have public input before the park board meeting, so they can speak before the park board actually discusses the topics. And then this will be coming back to council for a regular meeting, at which time would be another time that it could be addressed, different items and options, preferably before that time.
We are going to take public input after after the presentations and our discussion.
Perfect.
Fred, in past years, we have had, or the Parks Department has done a outreach to the community. I mean, I remember up at Station 73 that we had quite a gathering. So depending on, you'd have to, if it's the decision of this council to begin to move forward with a little bit more information gathering, I mean, we can always put together some of those outreaches to the community to literally take the slides and go around town and see if and what the desires and the interests and the activities are.
Great.
Real quickly, I thought it would be helpful, we thought it would be helpful to run through a quick little timeline of our history of, just so you know what we've done with the pool. In 1972, the pool opened by King County. It was built with forward thrust bond money. In 1994, the city of Issaquah, we took ownership of it. In 2004, the mayor appointed a citizens advisory committee to explore just, the pool expansion. At that time, too, I believe we were also discussing the pool and community center expansion, because those who can remember back to when the community center was built, there was a phase 2 that was once dreamed of, which was a civic campus there that tied the pool and community center together in one big building. And I believe that was prior to, I want to say 1992-ish or something, 93, where that concept came out. And like I said, the community center was built with that vision at that time. In 2005, like I said, the Citizens Advisory Committee recommended pool and community center expansion. And then in 2008 and 2009, a pool feasibility study was conducted where we did a number of public input meetings. We did a statistically valid survey, and it was, I'd say a pretty elaborate process. We had a lot of community input on that one. And then in 2012, we, the EMC, which just presented, did the public survey for a park bond feasibility study, just the feasibility of running a park bond, which, like I said, he covered that just now, and that sort of gives us to where we're at today. And I don't know how many times we don't get a chance to get up here and brag a little bit about the great things the staff at the pool do, but they do some wonderful things. As you can see here with this picture, there's just, we have things for specialized recreation, young, older, everywhere in between. We have some really great things. I got some stats here too that just, we've been running the pool for 19 years. The Julius Bone Pool has been recognized by the American Red Cross as the largest learn-to-swim program for single facility in all of King and Kitsap counties, with 7,589 swim lesson participants in 2012. The Julius Bone Pool is it's the home pool for Issaquah, Skyline, and Liberty swim teams that have, well over 225, high school athletes. So like I said, that pool houses 3 high schools as their home. That's their home facility. The Julius Bone Pool is a home facility for Issaquah swim team and its 300 members. In 2012, and this is actually a neat thing, 244 Issaquah Middle School 6th graders and 80 Cougar Ridge Elementary 3rd grade students participated in the Julius Bone Pool Aquatic PE program. I don't know how many people know about that, but what's really neat about that is every kid that's in 6th grade at Issaquah Middle School got an opportunity to have swim lessons. Every 3rd grader at Cougar Ridge Elementary got to have an opportunity to have swim lessons. Now, for a lot of the kids, that's not that big of a deal because they're in swim lessons all the time. The big deal is the kids that didn't get a swim lesson or never have had water safety training, got it. So those kids, and we would love to see that expanded throughout the whole school system, that kind of water safety, that they're getting touched at a point where if their parents or anybody, whatever, if they just haven't had the opportunity to get swim lessons in water safety, they get it. So that's, I think, something really neat, something we're really proud about. In 2012, the Julius Bone Pool staff trained 61 new lifeguards, we're like one of the premier places for training lifeguards, and these people are going out and lifeguarding at beaches and other, other pools around the east side. So it's a really neat thing to think about, that there's just a lot of things that staff up there does. It's great. And like I say, a lot of kids are learning to be safe around water. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, I'll move on to Rick.
Okay, I'll be quick. Okay, well, yes, I'm Rick Patterson. I'm the Facilities Maintenance Manager, and I get to follow up after Ann and Brian with their attractive and fun presentation. I get to talk about our ailing and dying pool. So I'm mainly here tonight to follow up on a couple of questions that came up at our April 1 question from Councilmember Martz regarding some elements of the pool and corrosion and then repair and replacement. So just quickly, running an indoor pool, there's some inherent problems that come with it, and corrosion is one of them. And when we are developing our maintenance programs to deal with this stuff, we work closely with our vendors and contractors to make sure we're getting the right products and finishes on these things and try to keep this pool going as long as we can. Our staff's gone to great efforts just to try to keep it running and keep all these services there for our competitive swimmers and recreational swimmers and whatnot. So a quick maintenance history on the pool is, as Brian mentioned, it opened in 1972. King County ran the pool for 22 years under what they call the deferred maintenance program due to funding reasons or whatever. It's just where they were at the time. So some of the things that we're dealing with today could be a direct result from some of those deferred maintenance programs they ran. Some of the things we're dealing with are just the result of the technologies and the materials of the time that have kind of expired and gone through their life. And then some of this stuff at the pool, the equipment has actually performed well over 41 years, and we're still using it today, but it is at the end of its life, and its failure is imminent. So that's kind of what's gone on with the pool. We took it over in 1994. We've had it for 19 years. Again, our staff has worked closely with everybody, with all of our resources, to try to keep it up and running. But the truth of it is, it's an uphill battle for us, and it's kind of a losing battle with the age of the pool being 41 years and the life expectancy on average is 30 to 40. So that depends on how well the pool is maintained over time. So the pool renovation would really be a breath of fresh air for this pool and breathe some new life into it. And it would continue to be there for our users for the next 20, 30, and with a good maintenance program, 40 more years easily. One of the most effective tools that we have to battle the elements of the pool or maintain the pool in a good condition is the ability to bring in fresh air to the pool, recirculate the fresh air throughout the pool, and also the materials that we select are important to the pool. So a renovation would allow us to bring all of our HVAC equipment up to current standards, more efficiently run all the air and circulate everything, our pump systems, heating systems, and whatnot. So
Rick?
it's just, yes.
Would you mind going a little bit more in-depth as to what you think that $5 million could do for the systems? What gets replaced, and, is it a basic?
Yeah, when I say the systems,
it all out and
we're
put it all-
taking it all out, kind of taking the guts out and putting new guts in, and that's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that people wouldn't see. But what they would feel is they would have better quality, better air quality, better water quality, better control over the temperatures of the humidity. It would just be a more pleasurable environment for recreational swimmers, competitive swimmers alike. Some of the things they would see, we're talking about the pool liners. There's talk of family changing rooms. All these things need to be put out there for design and development, but it's the concepts that we're putting forward as needs for the pool. New decking, maybe some, locker room improvements, all kinds of stuff. And these are things that we've had feedback on and have been asked about and commented on.
So the mechanical structure that actually operates it, all the pumps and so on, all of that would literally be brand new?
That is what we'd be going for, yep.
Okay.
And what the limitations on are that we would have to rely on our design engineers to work out the details.
And then some aesthetics as far as new locker rooms, new deck,
Yes.
new, okay.
Yep.
So that
Our
really-
users would definitely see a a change there, and we'd be also addressing ADA issues that we currently aren't meeting, but we're grandfathered in, so, yes.
Yeah, since you mentioned that, even the survey questions, there was a big emphasis on safety improvements. Could you highlight what would be the safety improvements in this plan?
Well, some of the safety improvements we have are, one of the things is just having wider areas and passageways for our ADA. We're meeting minimum compliance, but we can do better. One of the things that's in the 5 million package is safely getting people to the second floor that have disabilities. We don't have a way to do that right now. So an elevator is being discussed, for that. So there's no glaring safety issues at the pool, but we can do better. Does that answer your question? Okay. Eileen, is that good for you?
That's good, thanks, Rick.
Okay. I'll move to the next one. For the repair and maintenance of the pool, it kind of, there's been some questions about it, but just kind of think about it as owning your car or your house. It's going to have parts that fail and need to be replaced, and they wear out, and you just have to make those decisions to, get them repaired, and some parts last longer than others. When we're trying to predict the timing of replacement, that was one of the questions that came up. There's really only two scenarios that you can come up with for replacing equipment. You can either do it too early or you can do it too late. So there's some consequences that go along with replacing it too late. And you get your unexpected downtimes, you get equipment failures, increased for demand maintenance, you're keeping parts inventories on hand that you wouldn't need to have. Unnecessary energy consumption caused by outdated and inefficient equipment. You get dissatisfied and you lose customers due to poor air quality and water quality issues and emergency closures and that sort of thing. So that's some of the disadvantages of doing it too late. And obviously the advantages of a timely replacement of this equipment are being a proactive preventive maintenance approach is that you get to avoid all the consequences I just mentioned above. So I just wanted to read it again. The delaying the improvements to this pool is just advancing it towards more failures at higher costs and more frequency. And even with the best efforts of our facility staff, again, we're on an uphill battle here. So that kind of concludes that part of it. What I do want to finish up with is kind of a real-time situation of where we are at the pool. This is a picture that was taken last Wednesday. You can see the discoloration if you look closely of those two coils there. This is actually a boiler that we just discovered. Boiler number 1 has a hairline fracture here, and it's going to fail. We'll get some runtime out of it. It may be a few weeks or a few months, but we're now getting we're getting cost estimates to replace either the complete boiler or the two bundle there. Right now we're estimating cost of that to be between $20,000 and $25,000 just for the heat exchanger. Boiler number 3 is also having some ignition failure problems. We think we can get that fixed in the next couple of weeks. But going into the winter, we will definitely need all 3 of our boilers. In the summertime, we can run on 2 boilers with the lower demand, but in the winter, we really can't. So we'll be looking to get this boiler. We're starting to look at replacement on that. So currently, we have 1 boiler that is running efficiently, and this is just the kind of stuff that we're dealing with on an ongoing basis. So that kind of concludes my responses to Mr. Mart's questions. Are there any others?
Can I ask one more?
Sure.
Okay. So if we're going to totally replace all of the equipment in this, is there an advantage to going to salt as opposed to chlorine? Or can you even possibly do it?
You can, and they both pose their own problems, and I think it's one of those 6 of one, half dozen of the other sort of things. You're just going to come up with a different venue of problems. Neither one.
They're both corrosive.
Yeah, neither one better than the other. It's just a preference.
So they have. It lasts longer in salt than in chlorine.
Yeah, and it salt creates different elements for the things around it. So.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay.
Any questions for Rich?
Nope. Yeah.
No? Okay. I'll ask.
Ask questions of me?
Okay.
Ask questions. So, I have questions about the public process. So the difference between the 2006, the development of that bond, and what the process was for that, and how that compares to this, because I think we have this just to the park board, and I thought there was another additional step last time.
Last time, what we did was we had a citizens committee that was a subcommittee of our park board, and they met 3 times during the summer before they went out to vote. And Julie Yelm, who was our park board chair, she chaired that. And so they hosted public input meetings that way. And during that process, we mostly heard a lot from the soccer folks, and they had wanted artificial turf field, which we ended up getting. And so that was the difference between now and then, is that was the process that the city had used
Okay.
for 2006.
Because my concern is that I'm not sure that we have this, other than the meeting we have tonight, kind of low profile is my concern.
Noted.
And I think it would be important, I mean, we still, and I think it would be, if it's something that this council desires that we continue to look and work towards, I think it would be important to sort of do the reverse calendar of, if we need to have it on the November ballot, then where do we need to be, at what different steps, and what opportunities do we have to take it to the community, to sort of do the, as Parks has done in the past, to take it out to the community, to ask those questions, to get feedback, and to understand what's the values and the most important pieces for our citizens.
Josh?
Do we have, move this a little closer. It's not a committee. Do we have an answer to the question I asked at the last presentation about the tax assessment based on the amount of the bond? So we had been presented with figures that if it were a $10 million bond, taxpayers would be paying X per $1,000. If we were to increase the bond and try for something that I would call bigger and better, what would be the impact? And I don't know if the study really takes a look at that, because it uses 10. I mean, there's the question about 21 million that was thrown in there also, but it didn't seem that any of the questions were really geared towards, would you be willing to pay X dollars and cents more? And then could we assess whether that, 80% approval rating drops the higher you increase the tax assessment, or vice versa? I don't know where the sort of pain threshold is for the public when it comes to the property tax. So I'd asked that last time, and I don't know if we have the numbers yet, or if that's still in progress.
I'm going to ask Andrew if he would help me answer that question about where's the pain threshold of where it doesn't work any longer as far as a tolerance level?
Well, this is kind of, the answer is that because of PDC requirements, Public Disclosure Commission requirements, they don't want you to design it that way. So they frown upon the idea of saying, well, you give us 50, will you give us 60? What about 70? What about 80? They're okay with, you've designed a package based on needs, and do people support that level of need? And so that's why it wasn't in the survey in that particular way. There are things you can learn about what people's tolerances are from asking $10 million. And if you have 74% tolerance and you need, 60 for a bond, can you go higher? I absolutely think there's some room there. What we tend to see is what you see in pricing of anything is that there are certain thresholds where people start to drop off. So under 100 versus over 100. But at $60 average cost, you had 74% support. So, people are probably willing to support higher levels.
And so my question on the math is, what is the actual difference in tax? If it's a $20 million bond, do you just literally double the number?
Yeah.
So there's
Right.
no slope. It's just
Right, and so that would be, yeah, and if, from my experience in survey research, $120 is a very different animal than 60, but 80 is not so different than 60, right? But really, the only way, and the way other jurisdictions test these things, is they say, these are our needs, and this is how much we think it'll cost, and this is package A. Do you support package A? and here's package B that's a different package, it doesn't cover all the same things, this is how much that would cost, what do you think about that? This is what you're losing if you do the smaller package.
Fred?
Yeah.
A couple comments? So, in considering what was done in 2006, I'm very comfortable with the fact, I think you call it a citizen, was it a
It was a-
advisory
It
or?
was a subcommittee of the park board, and as I mentioned, Julie Young was our
Yeah.
park board chair. And so they hosted 3 different meetings and they went out, like, one of them I know was up at the Highlands at Blakely Hall. And they.
Mike?
Oh, sorry. And so they hosted them, and people just came and said, you know, I like this, I don't like this, I'd like to see this instead. And then at the end of that, they went back to the park board, and then the park board gave their recommendation to the mayor.
So, sensitive to Councilmember Barber's comments about the schedule and being able to use the November election or not, because I know there's a cost to the city if we don't. I'm much more comfortable with that process where we are presented with, you know, a list of projects that I know was vetted internally, and you guys provided some justification. But anything that we can still do and do both expediently and cost effectively to replicate that process, where there is some group of citizens that are focused on collecting and discussing and debating and coming up with a recommendation of the projects. So I'm really just talking about the park, not the pool. I'm not talking about the land acquisition element. Now, but you could, I guess you could expand that. But in my mind, that other, it's up on the board right now, the other 1.5 million, you know, what options, you know, what list of projects? I'd be most comfortable if I knew that we were able to run something like the process that was done about 7 years ago. I'd be very interested in that. And I'll say as well, in that there's little doubt in my mind, and I'm glad that kind of the minimum we're talking about is rebuilding what we have, make it become a state of the art, at least, you know, in place. I still hold on to the aspiration that maybe this community can still, you know, take it to the next level as well when it comes to the pool. You know, we have had a limited amount of contact from people out there, but I do know that any opportunity, and this is the time for us to really explore and vet and then decide whether any type of expansion is really in the cards for us. I think, you know, I think of our city, and that just having a pool, having a quality pool is a great asset. I think that now is the time to consider, you know, can we do something more? Can more longer lanes or other facilities, a kiddie pool or what have you? And don't take any of that verbatim. I'm just thinking, you know, I appreciate the kind of the conservative approach to fix it in place. I think that was largely based upon, you know, the tolerance we felt that was in the numbers from the surveys that were done. And I don't want to pass this moment by without making sure that we did the proper assessment of whether or not really an additional enhancements were possible. I don't know how to do that. That's not my specialty, but it's I've sensed among some of the citizens and my colleagues that there's real interest in looking at that option for the pool.
Yeah, Andrew?
I just want to say real quick that, you know, the purpose of the survey was to gather public input in a statistically reliable and projectable way. And we did, while we didn't ask so much, you know, project by project comparisons, we did ask priorities around funding. What types of things do you want to fund? And that's a good resource for kind of giving you guys these general buckets that people are thinking about as priorities.
Stacy?
We did get some feedback in the last couple of days about possible expansion of the pool, just adding a few lanes. I think there was a figure thrown in there, $3 million. I don't know where that figure came from. Are you familiar with that feedback?
No.
Okay.
I haven't heard that either.
Okay.
There was an email today or yesterday and a suggestion, so that email is available. Other questions or discussion before we take public comment and then sort of summarize where we're at and next steps. So, other questions? Is there anyone who would like to take up to 3 minutes to share their thoughts with our discussion? Yes, sir. I think the podium would be good. That way you can be on TV and those watching at home can see you.
That's exciting.
So if you just identify yourself briefly and
Yeah, no problem. I'm Eric O'Daffer, and I'm on the board of the Issaquah swim team that was mentioned. And I was the person that sent you guys an email, and I copied Ann and Jen. So thank you. You guys are working hard. I know you've got a lot of priorities to consider. And just vantage point from our standpoint, Bone Pool, the Parks and Rec team and the city works as a mini miracle. We've got 300 competitive swimmers there. Lots of people come through it. If you haven't been there, take a look and see what's going on there. I guess my only message is a continuation of the message that I shared with you at the last city council meeting, which is this is a once in every 2 decade, maybe even once in every 4 decade decision that you can make. We are fully supportive of the plan that says, hey, let's keep what we've got in place. Losing Bone Pool as an asset for the community would be a train wreck for everybody involved. But it is also a great opportunity, I think, to take a look at this and potentially expand it. And on that site, and we have had some brief discussions with Brian and his group, to think about going to the west of that. There's a large piece of land and relatively cost effectively a separate competitive pool that would free up the space of the existing pool for more of the recreational things that people talked about in lessons. Could be pretty feasible. You don't have to look at it as the Taj Mahal. There's some cost-effective ways to do that. And you've got community supporters in the Issaquah swim team that don't have tremendously deep pockets, but do have a good membership and some resources available. So thank you. I appreciate all the work. And on behalf of the Issaquah swim team staff and volunteers that have joined me, we appreciate your guys' work. And if there's anything the Issaquah swim team can do to help advance this as you're planning it, we're happy to be involved in that. Thank you.
thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, my name's Connie Marsh. I have a store at 1175 Northwest Gilman Boulevard, and I also live in town. And Corey, who's I live with, who's been calling right now, probably to yell at me, has been bending my ear every morning about this parks bond. And he's in San Francisco, so he can't come and speak, but he is a fan of redoing the pool and totally spending more money, making the bond about the pool and fixing it and doing it right. Though one of the conversations we have often is, why are we looking at suburban pools? We've both lived in urban areas where a pool is actually on the bottom floor of a multi-story building. It is a part of a community center. It is a small piece of a large thing. And it seems that we are not looking to our central Issaquah plan and our increase in density when we look at what we want in a pool. So I think we need to expand our thoughts and our imaginations to try to create a pool to go with our new world. So for me, I've been frustrated because almost every day I go on the website and I think, is the pool bond even on the website yet? No. And it's hard for me to think that we're trying to engage the community when there's absolutely no presence or education for the broad spectrum public anywhere where they could find it, even if they wanted to speak on the topic. So that's a reasonably easy way to do that, and I've been getting many pushes every day of emails of things that are happening, and I think that's at least one pathway to start getting the public involved. The lights on the sport fields, it was interesting because I had a woman come in who actually is all about tech lighting. It's her sideline. So I asked her about sports lighting and how quickly it is advancing. And I think we would need to delay on that a little bit because I think the technology is coming where we are going to have better, brighter, cheaper lighting, and it's likely to take slightly different wiring, and we don't want to have to do it all again in 2 years because that's how fast the new lighting systems are coming upon us. if we are trying to follow what the citizens have already said they want, clearly it's open space and protection. And it does not seem that we are actually following the survey in what the citizens want in this bond. This is me speaking without Corey going like this. And then I don't see any emphasis on the Central Issaquah plan, where we know we have a funding issue to get our parks for the Central Issaquah plan, yet it's not indicated in this parks bond. And we know that's a near-term change that we need to do. So we need to actually feed into these new ideas that they're talking about is funding Central Issaquah Plan parks. And I believe I'm under 3 minutes, and that finished my list. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Anyone else desiring to speak on this topic? Seeing no one then, Eileen, where are we?
Well, Fred, if I can make a recommendation, I'd like to see this subject, this topic, go back to Parks Board, which is coming up in this week or next week?
Monday, the 20th.
Monday, the 20th, and see if they can put together a committee of citizens that will take and gather citizen input like they have done on some of the past bond measures, and get that information and that feedback from our citizens. And then, Fred, I'm not sure from there. So once we've gathered that information now, it would either come back to services or it could come back to this work session again. And probably services, so that we could then forward, if it's suggested to go forward with this, we could have an agenda bill back to council.
Is that, Josh?
It would be nice throughout this process, at whatever stage, to have, and I think it was talked about a few moments ago, some form of options or packages or something that could be looked at, because there's so many permutations here of different things that can be done. And, you know, you hear some folks say, well, we should just spend the whole thing on the pool. Or, you know, we could have 25 different small items, or some combination thereof, or something we haven't even thought of yet. Or we could make it this big, or we could make it this small. So, you know, if we could somehow narrow down the list, I don't know how many packages, you know, 4 packages, 5 packages, options A through E, and then from there you can kind of hone in on what do people value and what's important and how much do we want to spend, because otherwise this kind of discussion could take hours and hours and hours.
Well, in past, and jump in please, Ann, we've sort of had all the different elements up on a board, and you could pick and choose, not necessarily Parks Board and didn't necessarily say this is your option 1 and these are the 5 items you get and this is, you know, option 2. It was more of a pick and choose, if you like this, and whatever gained more support, what individual item gained more support was what ultimately.
Right. The last time that we went through this process, Josh, the park board gave a recommendation to the mayor, and then the mayor came to you folks and said, you know, this is what I'm recommending on an agenda bill, and then you approved it. And that's what happened last time. It may not happen that way this time.
Based on citizens' input.
It was citizen input and a survey. But I do want to emphasize that the survey is citizen input. So you do have some citizen input.
Statistically
It is statistically valid, and it's also
Citizen
from citizens
input.
that you don't necessarily see from or hear from. So it's just different citizen input, but it is citizen input.
So I think from what I'm hearing is a desire on the part of the council to have a citizens advisory committee, either from or led by citizens with park, you know, to come up with a recommendation to the park board so they can do their things and make the recommendation to the mayor that would then go back to services and safety for their review, and then we'll go from there.
And as soon as those, if, you know, Parks Board gets some ideas on dates and places, we'll make sure that gets up with Autumn and up to the city website so people can follow the process.
Perfect. Okay, any other discussion on this topic? And staff, EMC, thank you very, very much this evening. We learn more and more, and I'm learning more about pools than I ever thought I would know.
Maybe you didn't want to know.
Okay. Our next topic is an update on the Klahanie Annexation Study. We're going to take 5 minutes before we reconvene and shift over, and we'll be back in 5 minutes.
Our display is up there. How do we turn that off?
Okay, our next topic is an update on the Klahanie Annexation Study. And so Stacy, for a brief introduction to sort of kick things off, and we'll get rolling.
Sure. So as you all know, Land and Shore has had this topic for a few months now. The Klahanie annexation, potential annexation area includes Klahanie and a number of other neighborhoods. It's not just Klahanie. And so the question is, the broader question is before us again about whether to annex. And as part of that, the city commissioned a study with Nesbitt Planning and Management. And Tom Nesbitt and Cynthia Stewart have been coming to Land and Shore every month this year. And I think it's just been this year. And presenting us with the results of their study findings and their research. So they're here tonight to present to the council, to all of us at the same time, so you all can hear what we've been hearing, plus I'm sure some updated and additional information. And with that, I'll let Tom start. Oh, okay, we'll start with Cynthia.
Does that mean that's on? You're on. Okay.
Included in what we have been doing as far as sharing information with the public is, as the consulting firm has been completing the various components of the financial analysis, we have been placing that information up on the city's website. Also along the way, as we've been meeting with different groups, frequently asked questions are also up on the website. Last Wednesday night, we held a meeting here in this building for the community to come and hear the presentation and the information that the consulting firm has gathered. And along the process, as they were asking questions, we kept track of those. And we're working with Cynthia and Tom to get those additional questions from community members up to the website. We anticipate that information will be going up sometime this week. So I just kind of wanted to let all of you know that we have been, as we're getting updates and pieces of information, we are in fact putting them up on the city's website. Oh, and we have another community meeting on May 22nd at Challenger Elementary, starting at 7. So that's another opportunity for the community to be involved.
That kind of took half of what I was going to say away and covered that base, so thank you very much. I think I've met all of you at this point. I'm Cynthia Stewart, and just wanted to outline before Tom starts what our purpose for tonight's meeting was. Basically, for those of you who haven't been following it as intensely as the Land and Shore Committee, we wanted to kind of go through the background about how the study was conducted and answer some questions about the data. Because we only have a short agenda time tonight, we'll try to do that as quickly as possible, not in a great amount of detail. But for each of you, there is a notebook that has the full, most recent versions of the study in it. The study is being conducted in pieces, so each of these chapters is labeled draft still. The intention is that in June, when we finish the public meetings and finish this workshop, we will aggregate all of the data and put it together in a final report. But for right now, the pieces that Diane mentioned that are on the web are what's in your notebook, in addition to some other material for tonight. Another thing that we'd like to do tonight is outline for you the questions that we think you will need to answer as a council. And so a big piece of the agenda will be walking through what those questions are. We don't expect you to answer them tonight at all, but simply to lay out the information, what the considerations are, and make sure that you're comfortable that you understand what those questions are. And then your answers to those questions will occur at a later meeting. So I think that takes it to you, Tom.
Okay.
I've found out after the public meeting that I didn't stand close enough to the mic, but with such a tiny group, we should be fine, I think. Okay. Or I can do it without, if that's all right for everyone.
It's not all right.
Okay.
You need to speak into the mic because
yes.
this is being televised.
Okay.
And they won't be hearing you at home.
Gotcha.
And if that red light up there that says on air starts blinking, they're not hearing you in the control room.
Okay, okay.
Could I add one more thing? In your section 5 in your notebook, under tab 5, there is a copy of the PowerPoint. And that is the first batch of pages in that section right up to the yellow page. So if you want to pull that out, you can go along with him and take notes or whatever.
What I'm first going to do is to give you at fairly high speed the same presentation that we gave at the first public meeting last week, and that we'll be giving next week up at Challenger. As you've heard, this study is a modular study. It's constructed in building blocks, the first three of which are the fiscal bases, the revenues, and the costs. We do this sequentially and in blocks because some items of a study are controversial, but most are not. Most are simply data, and none exceed this than the data characteristic of the fiscal bases. No one ever argues about those. There is a right answer for what the taxable assessed valuation of an annexation is. There's a right answer for the population. But there isn't a right answer for level of service. And there isn't a right answer, not just one, for how you balance revenues against costs when you come to the end of a study. So by compartmentalizing it in building blocks, we get most of the way through a study without any serious disagreement. And it also makes sort of as if it's modular, plugging in and out of your computer. It's easier to fix items too if they're in building blocks. In parallel with building the blocks, we've met regularly with the Citizens Task Force, which is now flowing into the public meetings, and in parallel with all we've put quite a large amount of material up on the web. And when we have, basically the web is the ultimate receiver of many inputs that we get. If someone writes a letter to the editor and then it's passed to us, if someone makes a comment at a public hearing, public meeting, Cynthia has distilled those into sort of archetypal questions and then answered them. And it's amazing how calming that makes the situation, rather than answering a person, answering the issue that they raised after you rephrase it so that it actually draws from issues that many people have raised. Our approach to the fiscal bases was to basically focus on the main parameters that feed both revenues and expenses. Population, taxable assessed valuation, retail sales, real estate sales, and gross utility revenues. This table is at just barely readable size in your notebooks. The pattern to see here, and I find if you look at a data table and look for patterns, there's less to remember. There's one, so you achieve a higher understanding. Basically, the patterns here are a third and a fourth. All these fiscal bases in comparison to the city, if you round them a bit, like in each one of these, I'd invite you to take the Klahanie figure and divide it by the Issaquah figure. So, and not to be compulsive about it, don't do it with a calculator, do it in your head. And you can do it in your head if you round it, because the population's about 10,000 in Klahanie. The population is about 30,000 in the current city, so it's a third. This would up the population by a third, which would just be of sociological interest, except that there are a lot of revenues that tie to population. So all those revenues downstream go up by a third. Parcels follows about the same, third. Lane miles are about a fourth. So the road inventory that the current city has would go up by about a quarter with this annexation. So to move on to revenues, they all flow from the fiscal bases. Our approach on revenues was to only start with line items that were in your budget, which are far more than those that an annexation would build on. But we looked at all the line items in the budget and identified those that would change with annexation, applied the tax rates to those, and that yielded the revenues, and there was very little to do beyond that. In any collection, there tend to be some dominant forces, and in revenue, there are what we call the big five. Almost all your revenues occur in these five areas: property tax, sales tax, state shared revenues, utility taxes, and REIT. And here's how they array against the city. And again, they follow the rule of about thirds or fourths. With one exception, and that's in taxable retail, in sales tax. The sales tax, it's not negligible in the annexation area, but it's very small compared to the city at large. This is not unusual. Annexation areas that have not been annexed yet are often waiting to come in for a good reason. They don't. The high taxable retail sales has already been picked. This fruit's higher on the tree, and an advocate of annexation would say, "Well, you already have our sales tax because you're where we shop." Our approach to costs was similar to revenues in that we also built that totally on the Issaquah budget. We identified which costs were variable. Many costs don't change at all. But those that do, we applied metrics to. So, for instance, on roads, remember the lane miles, which is a cost estimating metric for roads, went up by a quarter. So all the maintenance line items in the budget that applied to roads and that would change with annexation, we scaled up by roughly a quarter. Obviously, we didn't do it roughly, we did it exactly. But this is the pattern. Now, many things do not change with annexation, and it clears the field and makes it more transparent if you recognize that. Fire and emergency medical services, there's no change because you continue to be served by Eastside Fire and Rescue. Out in the field, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. The same trucks with the same employees would be rolling in the same directions. In a way, EFR is advanced in that it's regionalized already. So there's some impacts down the road with EFR and some sooner with Fire District 10, but none for annexation per se. The same for water and sewer. Whereas a fire district is immediately, upon the annexation of territory in the fire district, that area immediately is pulled from the fire district. The fire district can turn around and contract back to the annexing city. But as of the annexation, it's no longer in the fire district. Well, with water and sewer districts, there's no such link. And the same with school districts. There's no such link. it makes no difference to a school district which cities it serves. That does not change. None of these three things change with annexation per se. Well, in costs, there is a group. It's not the big five, it's the big three. But this is almost always the case that the lion's share of costs are for two items that are services provided 24/7, police and fire, and then also roads, being quite capital intensive. So if you track these three, you have most of your costs in hand, just as when you track the big five of revenues. We were able to do something pretty cool, I think, in police dispatch projection, in police service projection. Normally you have to come up with some kind of mathematical regression to predict what annexation of a predominantly residential area would do to the workload that is currently spread among residential areas and commercial areas. But we were able to do better this time because the Issaquah Police Department has tracked, in its dispatch system, has tracked everywhere that every car was dispatched for I think like 3 or 4 years now. So in the year 2012, that amounted to some 10,000 dispatches. And that's a huge number. And it's sitting there waiting for it to have sort of life after death. Its life was really just to get a car to a scene. But afterwards, an analyst can go back and look at it and figure out how much it cost, what the effort was. And what we did is we took a conglomeration of neighborhoods that in the aggregate resembled Klahanie in planning's estimation. And then we went to, and we identified those block group areas by census, counted the population inside them, and went to the dispatch data, plotted it all in GIS, and counted how many dispatches there were to that sort of pseudo-Klahanie, and then scaled it to top it off to just the right population, and had a historically fact-based dispatch. Now roads, we did a study very similar in form in 2004, concluding in 2004, and part of the roads analysis turned up what the pavement condition scores are. You probably know that when a roller leaves the asphalt or whatever and gets back on the truck, that segment that it just built of the road would be scored 100. And from that day on, it immediately starts to degrade, subject to periodic maintenance that slows the degradation, but ultimately you need to redo the road. But you can keep the wolf off for a very long time if you do adequate, immediate, short-term maintenance. If you don't, the road score goes down steeper and steeper, and at about 50 starts to drop through the floor. Well, comparing and then you need to rebuild the road base, and then it's really costly. So you can delay a little, and that helps you even out and follow in good budget years and bad budget years. But if you delay too much, you pay, and you pay big. But you don't pay until it gets down big, until it gets down into the 50s. But look where it was in 2004 vis-a-vis the city. It was 83 as opposed to the city 74 for average pavement condition score. And that's not because anybody was more virtuous in roads up in the PAA. It's just that they were newer. And they were sort of coasting. And it's, I think, a fair inference to say that that's what they've been doing since in these intervening 8 years, that they've been coasting, and now they're lower than the city. So this is sort of ominous. Eastside Fire and Rescue serves four cities and 2 fire districts. It's been quite topical lately because of this end date. That's the partnership's contract with each other goes through that date. And in January of that year, by the end of January, any partner can say, I want out and don't consider me in for the next 6 years. So there's speculation as to what's going to happen around January 25th or 9th. We've been through this before with Land and Shore. Basically, and we did it in far more detail, and it's in the impact report. Basically, Eastside's funding model allocates to each jurisdiction served by a station a portion of that station's maintenance. All stations, for convenience, but it's actually not a bad assumption, are assumed to have equal costs. And the percentage that each jurisdiction covers of a station's cost could be measured by many different things. It could be measured by calls. It could be measured by just aid car calls, or by buildings, or by square feet of development, or by assessed valuation. And it's historically been assessed valuation and continues to be so. The impact of the city annexing Klahanie in the short term is very minimal on even Fire District 10. It has no direct effect on EFR because it just changes who is paying. There's a cost associated with the properties on the ground in Klahanie, and they each have a share of the assessed valuation of the whole service area of that station. Upon annexation, Fire District 10 would no longer be paying that, and upon annexation, the city of Issaquah would be paying it instead. Okay. Longer term, this could run Fire District 10 into problems. Because eventually, with each annexation, especially of high AV property, the required levy rate for Fire District 10 to raise its share would go up. But in the short term, it is not a problem. How about Sammamish leaving? Well, Eastside Fire and Rescue ran many different scenarios with Issaquah annexing, Issaquah not annexing, Sammamish leaving the partnership and Issaquah annexing or not annexing, or Sammamish leaving the partnership and Sammamish annexing, or we're doing it without leaving the partnership, but ran all these, and they all have slightly different results, but none of them, and you can look at them and form your own judgment, none of them is abysmal. They're all fairly minor, even with a change in the partnership. This is the output of our cost model. You can read it on, let's see. There's a little circle at the bottom showing 15 FTEs would be necessitated by the annexation.
A question before you move on that.
Pardon? Sure.
A question before you go back to the FTE count, please.
Okay.
So perhaps this is going to be one of the questions you're going to tell us that we need to be asking ourselves. But I looked at this sheet and I thought, okay, there's a nice sum at the bottom, but how practically do you get, 0.18 of a person here and, point, there's some, those are...
You don't. They get rounded in that enterprise called budget prep.
Yeah.
So make it simple. Just say that the annexation came up with no extra employees except 0.5 of a clerk. because the clerk did various exercises and the population was going up such that you needed another 0.5 of a clerk. Well, if that's a profession where people hire by the 0.5s, fine. But if it isn't, either they'll get out of Diane a whole person and they'll have an extra half to do some new projects, or she'll convince them that they've just got to suck it up and that you can't get the half person. But that's how the real world goes. It's not, you can't just turn a dial and, as you imply, you can't just dial up 0.48 of a person or 0.52 of a person.
So in actuality, should this occur, then, we may move forward with maybe only 10 additional FTEs or 20.
Or 20. Or you could have, be confronted with some budget initiative that you couldn't resist and followed by a couple of good economic years, and you might go up without an annexation. Or the reverse. Right.
Thanks.
Yeah. This, the bottom line on this one is the other sort of dollar. If FTEs are one currency, dollars are the other. But how you compare the revenues to the costs is a little complicated. Not horribly, but a little bit. And the thing is that there isn't one cost and there isn't one revenue. In the revenues on your left, you see the 5.3 million. On top of that is added the sales tax, the state sales tax credit, which is good in your case for up to $1.2 million if you need it to extend service to the PAA. If you don't need it, you don't get it. So like if your bottom line showed that you were $1 million in the hole for extending service at the current levels of service to Klahanie, you would get $1 million from this 1.2 million sales tax offset, but you wouldn't get the last 0.2. And if you had no deficit, you wouldn't get anything from the sales tax credit. The sales tax credit, as a reminder, is 0.1% times your total taxable retail sales, not just in the annexation area, which, as we've seen, would amount to almost nothing. That was a fifth or a sixth. But to the whole city's taxable retail sales base. So it's fairly appreciable, but it only applies to the extent that without it you'd have a deficit. So that's the vagaries of the revenue side. On the cost side, there are two types of costs. One that start in year one and continue with slight changes, but they continue annually. The other types, and you'll see them in your table, and I can highlight it here. Right here. Here's the that are one-time costs that just to get going you need to pay, and pretty obviously you can't fund these one-time costs all in the first year because they're huge. So typically what you do is you amortize them, sort of like someone buying a car on time. If someone could only buy a car on time and finance it over 30 years, you'd say, you shouldn't be buying a car. But if someone wanted to take a loan out where they paid it off over 3 years or 4 years, you'd say, well, yeah, and that's what lots of people do. So we took a stab at what would be a reasonable amortization period and picked 5 years. You could elect a different amortization period. You could pick 4, and it would be paid off faster, but it would make the annual cost in the first 4 years higher. Or you could pick 6, and it would do just the opposite. So here, circled in red, and probably a little bit better readable in your books, is the annual cost plus 1/5 of the one-time cost. So annual costs of $4.6 million. 1/5 of $6 million is 1.2. 4.6 plus 1.2 are 5.8. So now to compare the 5.8, the one-time cost amortized plus the annual cost amortized, you can compare them to the two different revenues, and then in the bottom, which I think we made yellow, in yellow are the bottom lines under those circumstances. And to make life interesting, without the potential state sales tax credit, you have a $500,000 deficit, and with all of it, you have a surplus. It won't take you into surplus, but because you need it in order to get it. But if your costs went up, if you found other costs, you have $600,000 of potential revenue that would cover you. So what's the impact on the taxpayer? I think this reads fairly self-explanatory, but basically you have a lot of levies that apply on any parcel. It all boils down to just one tax bill, but it's got its constituents, and each of these millage rates, the dollars per thousand, apply. Well, most of them don't change. The two that do change are you lose the King County road levy, which currently sits high at its legal maximum, $2.25 per thousand. And instead, you pick up the city's levy and the city's debt. Overall, your levy rates sum goes down by almost $2 per thousand. That's in counterbalance to an exposure you have to a kind of tax that you don't get when you're outside a city, and that's a utility tax. Even with the utility taxes, which are arrayed in the middle of this graph, the net change is down on taxes. So this is, as it stands now, this is an increase in service for, at least in the longer term, a decrease in taxes. Road maintenance, the indication of the pavement condition scores are that the road maintenance would be substantially better. Police services, there are things you can do with a local police chief that you cannot do with a county sheriff dispatched from far away. Fire and EMS in the short term are unchanged. And representation, you have people around the table who represent you rather than down in Seattle. So everybody needs to weigh those for how much those differences make to them. We compared our revenues and costs to what we got back in 2004 too. So I'm going to pass it to Cynthia for just a short bit, unless you have questions you'd like to put in now. And she would summarize yeah.
We go back to the chart. I just want to make sure.
Which one?
Keep going back.
Revenue versus cost.
That page right there. So
Okay.
if we were to look at putting our annual budget together, just on operating, we'd be looking at, without the sales tax credit, $5.3 million.
Correct.
And then, however, the one-time costs are paid for, hold those aside. You'd be looking at an annual cost of about $4.6 million, right? Is that first column? So really, on
right.
an annualized basis, just looking at the operating budget of revenue versus costs, the city has a surplus of about $700,000 annually just to provide operating.
Right, but you need to get to it, and you would be at that point in year 6.
Right. So then you've got the secondary piece, which is your one-time costs, plus there may be, after some period of time, some decision-making about improvements that the city may choose to make in Klahanie Park or wherever else. So the capacity then really is balanced not only by the 1.1 million you get per year on the sales tax for, 15 years?
10.
For 10 years, but also the potential of an additional $700,000 annually in your operating expense. So you're talking about a potential net of 1.7 per year enhancement.
Yes, but I tell you how a pessimist would view that. Just to play the opposite side. Okay, I know that there's this bonbon that the state legislature gave us, but there have been bills in the hopper to restrict it, and it did get extended so that you only need to be in process of annexing as late as the 1st of January 2015. It was supposed to expire earlier. But there are indications in both ways, and anybody that could predict what the legislature is going to do, probably has a higher calling. So a pessimist would say, okay, I realize I could get that the first couple of years, but who knows what's going to happen. This could be eliminated the same way it had been created. That's possible. And then the other thing that the pessimist would say is, well, you're saying there's a surplus, but it's in the future. I, as a pessimist, like to see the funds here, or at least closer to here. Don't tell me about what I'll get in year 6. So, yes, Joe.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I was under the impression that if there were a $700,000, if there was actually $700,000 that the city would make on this, it wouldn't be available to get the annexation credit at all.
That's right. It would not. It would not.
So the only place that comes into effect is when there is a deficit.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yes.
I just have sort of a practical question. In the study, I was very confused about it, where it talks about costs, dollar costs. It also talks about FTEs that are needed. FTEs themselves have a cost.
Right.
So in places where it talks about dollar costs and FTEs, are those exclusive items, or are the FTEs rolled into your dollar cost?
The FTEs are reflected in the dollar cost. Have you ever come across a situation where a department had money at the end of a year or towards the end of a year, but they didn't have a position? I mean, they could afford to pay somebody, but they couldn't hire him because they didn't have the position to hire him into. So that's why we measure by both those. But yes, and we went to separate databases to predict the number of FTEs that went up. But if positions were no consideration, you could take away FTEs from the entire report and just go on dollars. you wouldn't be missing anything.
Okay,
Okay?
what's next?
What's next is that Cynthia is going to summarize, probably just from right there, the public hearing comments.
Yeah, I'm not going to take much of your time, but I just wanted to let you know that the frequently asked questions that evolved from the meeting are coming out tomorrow. They'll come to Diane, and she'll arrange with Autumn to get them online. The topics that were included, those of you who were there, I know will appreciate this, that probably the most frequently asked question at the meeting that we didn't put on for an online distribution is about the form of the ballot and the separation of questions last time about whether you would accept annexation or wanted annexation, and then whether or not you wanted the bonded indebtedness that comes with it. Second question had to do with parks and what happens to Klahanie Park, what happens to the privately owned parks there. The third question had to do with the police and whether or not we included the privately funded security service that the Klahanie Homeowners Association has. We did not include that in the study. Our assumption was that the city has an obligation to provide the same level of service throughout, and so that was the assumption we used. Some questions were asked about how much service would the police provide and whether or not they would have a station up there. And the answers to those were basically that becomes a budget call on your part, and a question about how you levelize service across the city. So, and then there was a question about sales tax, and it took the form of, does anybody recognize that we already pay sales tax by buying in the city? And I think Tom addressed that earlier. So the prevailing attitude was pro-annexation. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens next week, whether out there we get more of the same or whether we get a different balance of people there. So that was basically it. I don't want to take any more time unless anybody has a question about any of the items mentioned. Okay.
Okay.
Before Tom goes on, what I'd like to point out is behind your PowerPoint copy, there's a yellow page, and there's some material that we want to focus on now that is both in the PowerPoint and some in larger copies in your packet there. So you might want to find that and reference that as he's going through it.
If there's a large sheet after the yellow on a topic, it's a hard topic, and that's why we put it in both of these. I'm by nature a planner and by profession an engineer, but what I'm not, and friends would tell you this, is a good decision maker, and that's your guys' forte. And there are some pretty hard decisions coming up here on which there is no exact right answer. It's a trade-off, and that's what I'd just like to leave you with a clear understanding of. Here are the decisions that we distill out of the process, and in the rough order in which I think you would address them. The first is sort of obvious, though you tend to forget it when you're doing an annexation study. Should the city annex or not? If your considered judgment is no, then you can forget the rest of these questions. But if it's yes, the first is, what process should be used for annexation? There's an expedited, sort of low overhead process of annexation by interlocal agreement, and it's detailed on the subsequent sheets. There's this one on yours, but I'm going to go right back to the list, but have a sum in on this one as well. The process for annexation can either be by involve an election or circumvent an election. There are other ways that there's public input on that process, but you could go at it either way. The ILA is probably faster. not by a whole lot. But in the event of considering elections, we ran some numbers on the various dates of annexation you could have for the 4 different elections in 2014, and that's one page further still in your packet. Third question is, and this will be the hardest, I think, should the city seek the road funds levied but uncollected funds for the first year of annexation? This would definitely go away after the first year, but it's a lot of money and could be had. And I'll show you how in just a second, because I want to treat 2 of these unusual revenues. The fourth question would be, should the city seek this state sales tax offset or credit, either? It's the same thing, I just call it an offset because it's set up so that that money comes out of the state share of sales tax, so it's no burden on the populace. It just goes in different places than it would normally. And if you're down as far as 4 and answered yes on that, you'd want to be sure to double check that there were no costs that were quite reasonably and under high scrutiny could be considered to be the cost to provide, maintain, and operate municipal services in the annexation area. That's straight out of the RCW. You'd want to make sure you weren't missing anything, especially if you're showing that you've got unused compensation. But you also have to be rigorous about it. Then there are 2 timing issues that you need to understand, and whomever takes you forward, assuming you choose to go forward into annexation, whatever plots out the steps that happen in the city en route to annexation, that person needs to know these timing issues cold. And I'll just give you a quick look at it so that you can appreciate how hard it is. And then if you're down that far and understand the timing issues, when should the city, what should the city adopt as a target annexation date? And I just want to impress on you that this isn't that this whole study is a series of estimates. We think most of them are fairly good, but they're estimates, and the cost of adjusting them slightly are not huge. The cost of missing one of these cutoffs on these revenues is $500,000 at the least on every single one of them. And we're talking down to a period of days. I mean, if you wanted to turn on a sales tax revenue or state shared revenues example, and you wanted to turn it on at the 1st of April, which is one of the 4 times a year that you can turn it on, and you get your stuff together the 2nd of April, or it needed to be by certified letter or something like that, you lose the whole next 3 months of a potential revenue. And it isn't just that you get the same revenues but they're delayed. If I put my request in on time and Fred puts his in, one day late, we each get that stream of revenues, except mine start today and Fred's start in 3 months. From 3 months on out to the rest of eternity, we're collecting the same. The only difference is I got a hit early. Those hits are $600,000, $1.6 million. There are several different revenues, and they're quite substantial. So you can't, and this can't be done casually because to miss the deadline is just incredibly expensive. So let's I'd invite you to go past the election dates. Actually, go to the last one that has the green on it, okay? And you'll notice that that has 3 sheets in your binders. Because they're coming to accord on this is going to require some caucusing and trial proposals. And for each of them, I want you to have an easy way of keeping track of the bottom line. The bottom line, even just on the screen here, we had like 4 or 5 different versions of it, depending on what you collect. And this is just a guide for if you've got a way that you think would make the most sense for the city, and would and is the right political choice. I mean political in the very best sense, that it's the right balancing of interests. Use the green sheets to tally how much of a surplus you have or how much of a deficit you have. One point in passing on the annexation process flowchart. These charts all end up, the 2 vote-driven ones and the 1 interlocal agreement-driven one on the right. They all aim at March or September. That's because until recently, those were the magic sweet dates that if you timed an annexation or incorporation to occur, would maximize revenue. They are no longer the only line item in town, and so those dates aren't necessarily the best dates anymore. That needs to be decided again. Yeah.
I just have a question about the election.
Yeah.
So when South Cove and Greenwood Point, when I lived there in '06 and we voted on the annexation, it was only our neighborhood that voted for ourselves. We didn't vote on Klahanie, they didn't vote on us, the rest of the city didn't vote on either. It was only that neighborhood that voted to annex or not annex. Is it possible in an election to have the citizens of Issaquah also vote on the question of annexation? Or can you only, by law, ask the area subject to be annexed to vote on itself?
The latter. And I would correct one thing that you said in your preamble, and that's that that you were voting by neighborhood. You actually, nothing like that was determined a priori. All the proposed annexation was voting, and the city chose to say, well, this neighborhood said yes, so we'll take them. But it was one study. I did almost all the numbers with separate sums so that they could be disaggregated. But legally, I think it was just one annexation, was it not, Fred? Yeah.
Greenwood Point, South Cove, a combination of many different neighborhoods and homeowners association.
Mm-hmm. So let me just tell you a little bit on why I've circled these 2 dates and why, in the traditional way of looking at things, when life was simple, there are 2 optimal dates to incorporate or to annex. And that's because the property taxes are a real sort of, it gushes and then it's dry kind of phenomenon. They almost all come in 2 months of the year. They almost all come in April, a little bit spills over to May, or maybe it's halfway into May, and then the same 6 months later, because you pay your taxes in 2 lumps, and they get distributed as they come in. So if you're starting your enterprise and you're starting to deliver service, you'd like to have the revenues start as fast as possible. And when that downpour occurs, you want to have your hat under the downspout. And that occurs in April. And then it doesn't really occur in a big way until October. And you find that very topical when we move on just a little bit here, which I call maximizing the major revenues. Basically, there are four. Yeah, I'm sorry, there's not a handout on that. But you'll see that in your PowerPoint summary, and it would probably help to turn to that. That's number, I don't know, probably on the second page, or third page of the, probably on the third page of the PowerPoint slides. Is everybody finding that? Okay. Every one of these revenues has a starting date. You can only change your levy codes. In other words, you can only have an annexation take effect on August 1st. Excuse me, that misstates it slightly. And I'll elaborate on a future slide. The sales tax and the sales tax credit can turn on at the beginning of any quarter. Excuse me, the sales tax can turn on at the beginning of any quarter. The sales tax credit that the state offers can only turn on July 1st. So on that one, have an official date of annexation on July 2nd. You can start to get that sales tax credit in 364 days. Okay. Same thing on sales tax, which can be started at the beginning of any quarter. Go to the second day of a quarter, and you wait almost an extra 3 months for it. And then for each of these, before the starting date, you've got some lead times of what Office of Financial Management wants in order to turn on that revenue. For instance, to turn on the state shared revenues, they want a census, they want submission of the annexation to OFM, and they rule on it by granting you a certificate of annexation. They certify your census. So basically, although the state shared revenues turn on the first of any quarter, you need to be in line as much as 9 weeks before the start of that quarter. Okay? So you've got these 4 revenue streams that you need to maximize. Here's the odd one it's called levied but uncollected. And you'll see your night reading after the meeting is at the very tail end of the book, and it's in 2 forms. I think there's an RCW in there, and then there's a summary from Municipal Research Services Corporation that they gave us. The analysts gave it to us pre-release even, but that is very dense and productive reading. It's only 5 pages, but it should underscore most of what I've said. And here's one of those things. There are 2 magic dates in changing levies and any property tax. One is August 1st, and one is November 15th. August 1st is the date at which the county assessor, the King County assessor, considers the state of all properties for purposes of levies the following year. So for a second, I'd invite you to be like the data geek here and think of an incorporation or a city as not being so much a boundary, but just a collection of parcels, except that within your city, every parcel has a field that's called something like local jurisdiction. Right now, Klahanie's parcels, there are probably 5,000 of them. They all say King County as the local jurisdiction. The act of annexation is going to change that one field to say Issaquah, if indeed you choose to go that way and it passes. There are so many parcels that this whole machine can't start on a dime or stop on a dime. And matter of fact, the county says we need to know by August 1st, 5 months before the end of the year, in order to have a levy have effect the following year. The second deadline of 11/15 is the one just before Thanksgiving, is that you need to adopt your levy by that date. But your levy codes need to change on all the parcels by August 1st, before then. So it all comes down to one thing that if you can memorize this, you've got it. And basically put in what I hope will be one sentence. This is hard to read this and with my reading glasses and still stay next to the mic. Basically, whatever boundaries are in the assessor's database as of 8/1 of, in this case, year 2014, will have applied to it any levy that's passed up to 11/15. Up to 11/15. And it will apply the whole next year. Okay? If you change your boundaries, August 2nd, no levy in 2014, no levy will apply until 2016. It's a very long lead time. Well, what would happen, however, if you annex before August 1st and you pass a levy? That's still too late for the machine to incorporate it. You know, you've got thousands of parcels that haven't had their little field changed to say Issaquah. What do they all say? They say King County. So where do those revenues go? And what are they assessed at? The King County road tax is still collected the entirety of 2015. Where does it go? It goes to you. The road tax, the road levy, is much bigger than your levy right now. So it's quite a change in revenue for the year 2015 to be collecting the county road tax. I mean, you aren't collecting it. And King County is out nothing because their responsibility for maintaining the roads there disappeared on the 1st of January 2015 under this scenario. But it's a higher amount collected. It's not an extra tax, but it's a tax that the residents of Klahanie would see go away in the long term, but it would continue at the old rate for 1 year, for this 1 year. There are some restrictions, and it can be problematic, but it might not be for you. In that this diverted's the wrong, this levy but uncollected tax needs to go for capital purposes. I think it needs to go in your street fund. You know? Now, if you were very fastidious and funding your streets as little as possible, that would be one thing. But actually, you're taking general fund revenues and by policy, depositing them straight into the street fund. So there are two deposits that are sort of voluntarily going into the street fund. There's the real estate excise tax, and then there's the sales tax. Well, the real estate excise tax needs to go into something capital, but your sales tax is unrestricted. That just goes in the general fund. And you are, by policy choice, have at least historically said 25% of that is going straight into the street fund. Obviously, you could not do that in 1 year if you were having revenues that came in and needed to be deposited in the street fund. So, but if you were a city that was not making this voluntary contribution, as it were, to your street fund, this levied but uncollected would be a fairly poor gift, because you'd have might have a hard time with it. But if you're already donating more than transferring more than you literally have to of unrestricted general fund revenues, this might work for you. And this is the magic phrase. If you try and see if on your way home you can, or at home you can say that in one sentence to your spouse or child. So here's a reminder of the bottom line revenues and costs for certain assumptions, and then an exhortation that that you use your tally sheet to see if you've got a surplus or a deficit. And what I've sketched out here, these are the real numbers for the sales tax credit and the amortization of expenses over 5 years. The 700,000, the 0.7 bottom line revenues minus costs is not something you'd see, because the 1.2 would only apply if you needed it all, and you don't need 0.7 of it. So that's the bottom line as it currently stands. And are there any questions? I'd be happy to field them.
Wow. Well, Tom, that was a great presentation. My head is aching just a little bit trying to absorb everything that you said. I'm going to have to go to my colleagues for clarification of a number of these points. I'm sure they will help me out. I really appreciate that presentation, because that's a powerful message. And it's one that, you know, if we decide to do that, at least that maximizing the major revenues and this is important to mull over in our minds and plot how we would do that if we choose to annex the Klahanie PAA.
Before you go on to the next part of the discussion, could I just add one kind of closing comment? The process that we had worked out with Mark, and you've now gone through a staff change, and Diane hasn't really had the benefit of this discussion yet, but the process that we had talked to him about was that having had this discussion and any questions and answers, and we can do stuff by phone calls and email too, having had this discussion, that you would then work in committee on starting to answer some of those questions. And that the committee would then presumably be sending a recommendation to the full council, having worked with staff and not with us, other than just as a Q&A basis. The original concept was that you would have an agenda bill by June 17th, and that we would be available to answer questions in that discussion if you wanted them. So part of your conversation tonight, in addition to asking more questions about the information you just got, would be what kind of a process do you want to use, and is the Land and Shore Committee actually on board with that? So.
Well, thank you for that, because that was just going to be my next point, is the schedule that we're on is to have, as Cynthia mentioned, another community meeting on May 22nd, and then back to this topic, back to Land and Shore at its meeting in June. And like I said before, on schedule, I think we'll be asked for a recommendation from Land and Shore.
Well, the agenda bill will have a number of alternatives listed on it, and, I would imagine that Land and Shore, would discuss those alternatives, and it's an opportunity to, we'll have the benefit of a couple of public meetings, the good financial analysis that has been done, and we'll see how it plays out. Paul?
What would be on the agenda, Bill?
I don't know. I haven't seen, what would be on?
What would
it look like?
what would be the agenda, Bill?
Our concept, as discussed with Mark but not with you,
Okay.
was that you would have an agenda bill that would say something like, it's our intention to proceed with annexation of the Klahanie PAA, that either we want to proceed with an election or we direct staff to begin negotiations with the county. You would pick one of the two processes to use, and then depending on which process, you'd have subsequent other steps. But it would be presumably a recommendation from the committee to the full council about just exactly what it is you want to do.
It would be an agenda bill for referral to either the committee or another work session, but I'm assuming one of the recommendations would be, a referral, could be on the consent calendar, but when you look at alternatives, there is, not to annex also is an alternative. So it would be, that's how I envision it, although leadership has not discussed that at this point. And I guess Mark is no longer here. Mark, we did not have that discussion at Land and Shore.
So Cynthia, may I ask you for clarification? So I was looking at the very handy that sheet that has the decisions that will have to be made. It sounded like you were starting to address each one of them. Was that your intent?
Our intention was to provide you some background so that you could.
In terms of the agenda, I'm still back on the agenda bill question.
Yeah, that you would, and as Tom said, if you had a decision by the council as a whole to not proceed with annexation, you wouldn't need to worry about the following questions. If, on the other hand, the full council agrees, let's do an annexation, then you start knocking off some of these other things and include some of that information in your decision.
So would it be the intention then for these questions to be presented to Land and Shore? Just in this?
I think that the question is directed to either Diane or to Bob.
Yeah, and I think, given the detailed analysis that's going to have to be involved, this would be a typical discussion that you would see in committee. And so it would be there, and then that recommendation would go, and whatever the agenda bill structure would look like to council. when it gets done. Generally, agenda bills are written in the affirmative, so you'd have the question, the annexation question, and obviously that would get voted up or down. And then you'd have those other variant pieces to it. And then there's some options within that. So if there was an ultimate decision to say, well, maybe we don't want to do this, but we make some motion to do that, whatever those options may be. But I think a lot of the detailed analysis that would get done would still be like it has been in Land and Shore.
I'm still kind of back on Paul's question, what does the agenda bill look like? And so does it come to Land and Shore next month with those options on it?
So, yeah, I think it would be framed in a way based, we would start to, this analysis as you started to see here, and then you would have a framework that Land and Shore would then be able to do the further analysis and be able to answer some of these questions. So I think Land and Shore is a meeting coming up
Tomorrow?
And it won't be on
Not
that
on that.
agenda. So it will be the following.
In June.
Yeah.
So if I could just make sure I understand things, because I'm the new person, we could do something as early as the first of council meeting in June to have an agenda bill to say something to the effect, should the council consider annexation of the Klahanie area, that then gets referred to committee for further study. Am I following that process correctly?
Yeah, I mean, typically council refers an agenda bill to a committee, so.
Wanted to make sure.
Now, in this case, there's still a lot of analysis and work that needs to be done. So I think you'd see a framework in the agenda bill, but those questions would have to be identified and debated through at the at the committee level. It'd be structured in that way.
To answer your question, I'm not sure. We know what would be in the agenda bill. To be honest, that's not something that has been discussed, with leadership. This is the first time we've heard this information, so it's a discussion that needs to take place and before the next step in the drafting of an agenda bill.
But in any event, it sounds like some agenda bill would be coming to maybe the first council meeting in June, and then it would be decided at that meeting what would happen to that agenda bill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Paul?
Thanks, Fred. So that's a lot about process, and it's still a little bit murky to me. But of course, question number one still is, should the city annex or not? Now, that's a much more interesting question.
Well, that is a much more interesting question.
And maybe some of you have experience, whether you're on the council or participated in that annexation. Josh mentioned, what year was that when the South Lake Sammamish area?
It was 2006,
2000.
I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It was 2006.
So was there some process by which, or as far as even that the council went, Fred, I don't know, Eileen, or Joe, just to answer or address that question, number one, yes or no? Is there any historical experience?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I think that one was set up as a
That's-
vote.
That was a vote.
It was strictly a vote, and it was, let's have the vote, and then we'll make the decision
Okay,
after
all
the
right,
vote.
okay.
And it wasn't just a vote on annexation.
That's right.
It was a second question. It was a vote on,
Right.
do you assume the bonded indebtedness?
So our process, could fall, if it could be, should the city annex or not, it could be, well, let's have a vote and see.
It could be. That's an alternative.
Okay.
Josh?
So I have some questions about some of the numbers, and I'm not on the Land and Shore Committee, so I didn't get to really see the process making. There are three big numbers that stand out at me that don't seem to be included in the cost analysis. Well, they're included, but they're not in the final figures.
Which report are you in?
I am in the 2013 report. The sections are kind of all over the map.
They're all over the dividers. I mean, they're two per divider, and each divider has a label and cost.
There's three numbers that jump out, cost numbers. So one is the annual road maintenance cost was assumed in the study at $586,000-ish, but Public Works Operations was recommending $828,000 annual plus a pavement study. And my reading is that the 586 was chosen because that was based on the council's 2013 budget adopted level of service for pavement management. And I don't know if you were aware of the fact that we set that number somewhat lower than what it had been set in previous years because of the shortfall in funds for pavement management. And so in 2012 and 2013, that number had been significantly artificially reduced as a matter of council policy. And so that's one number. The second number is Issaquah Fall City Road, which, I've spoken with staff about, and the answer is, well, we don't have to do that project right away. And there's actually, I went to the King County Roads report, there's actually 4 projects that comprise the $38 million. So it's not like it's only one road project. Theoretically, you could do 1, you could do 2, you could do some. Whether we do it in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, at some point it would become Issaquah's responsibility under annexation. So you have the $38 million, and then you have the approximately $40 million to maintain the parks level of service using the adopted 2009 Parks Plan methodology. Now you can adjust that number downward if you want to change your level of service, but when you add up those 3 numbers, if you keep those levels of service and you keep the 2012 King County Roads report, you're talking about essentially $80 million that's not included in the final cost analysis. So I guess my question is, if you were to amortize those figures, how long would it take the city to essentially pay off close to $80 million worth of costs?
That's only as meaningful a question as the premise on it. And I'd suggest that we go back. You added 3 very different types of costs, lumped them together. I think it'd be more clarifying to answer them separately.
Okay.
And most of them fall to Cynthia. But I can pitch in.
I didn't capture the 2 numbers, and so I have to go back here. You said the annual road maintenance cost?
I could do the first one. How's that?
Okay.
Third for me and 2/3 for you. Basically, you're quite right. What we did is we ratioed all costs on line items in the city's budget, and there are like 800 line items of them. And if a line item was shown to have nothing to do with annexation, or some old expense, or something that would continue without annexation, and would have happened with it. So, but basically, we looked at which of those 800 line items were variable, and in specific, in Public Works Operations, which were variable depending on how many lane miles you had. Some things actually scaled better by the number of employees you had. I mean, you wouldn't want, the number of employees might be dictated by number of lane miles, but the cost of the employees probably depended on, a computer for each and file cabinets and so forth. And you're right, we took the budget adopted levels in 2013. But you can't really say as a council person, yes, we passed this budget, but by the way, that isn't what we really meant. Use a different budget for scaling to the future or serving an annexation. We'd have no way of saying, unless there was some formal way, but otherwise it'd just be hearsay. We really didn't mean that. Or we really had that higher, or it should have been higher, it was higher in previous years. Well, if it's a number that is being embraced, and I don't mean to be flip about it, I think it's quite a good process that people argue back and forth. Department directors' knee-jerk reaction is almost always to show us what they'd like to have, not what the dynamic budget process ended up with them getting. And since we're at some distance from it, which is both a good and bad thing, but the good thing of it is that it prevents us from favoring one horse over another. We say the judgments were done at budget time, and these line items were funded at this amount. We'll do the same thing, except we'll scale it by how much the demand went up.
So if I were to amortize, is there an interest factor that you used for doing that? So if I were to use the PWO numbers instead and just say, I know that it was artificially low, so I'm going to retool the figures and see what they come out to. Is there an interest factor spread over the 5 years or do you just literally divide the delta by 5 years or however many years you're amortizing?
You could do either. We just divided it by 5 years
Okay.
because 5 wasn't even a mandated figure, but it was.
So there was no depreciation factor built into the amortization?
No.
Okay.
It's also really hard in times of extremely low interest to do discounts, as you could imagine. But there, and Brett saw this in a flash when I said, well, this is what we said, we're scaling by these metrics. And he said, so I'm going to be underfunded in Klahanie, just the same ratio as I'm underfunded in Issaquah? I said, damn straight, that's right. And the place to boost that up is in your next budget. And you may win and you may lose, or you may win some and lose others. But we're not going to come in and kibitz on top of it. We're going to follow.
So how does that play into the other items then?
Okay.
The road, the Issaquah Fall City Road, which is not, that is a number that has been identified as a solid number by the county.
Actually, it was Brett who gave us a $38 million number, and Karen Wolf from the county is trying to validate that. But historically, that project's been on the county books for a long, long time. And I'm not sure it's a foregone conclusion either that you would assume full responsibility for it. It's truly a regional project. Part of what you might negotiate with the county and the annexation interlocal, if you do it that way, is that they continue to carry that project. I think there's all kinds of options. Because of the size of it and the uncertainty about whether or not it would absolutely be Issaquah's, which I personally question, we left it off. It was just too big of a number to grapple with at this level. As far as the parks is concerned, it's a whole different matter. The conversation is familiar to the Land and Shore Committee, and so I'm going to try and summarize it, and they may want to pipe up and correct something if I say it wrong. Basically, the way the parks numbers were done was a little different than the rest of the cost model. We didn't actually use a cost model. What actually happened was the Parks Department took a look at what it would actually cost to maintain Klahanie Park. So they actually did a task list. It would do X number of hours of this and Y number of hours of that, and they did a very detailed work plan. And they estimated the number of part-time seasonal staff and dollars that it would take to do that work on an annual basis. We came to the committee with that, and the committee said, well, but what would it take to make sure that we maintain our parks at the same level of service that we have? We're going out with a bond issue potentially, and how do we reconcile that? The only document that you have, I mean, it would be analogous to using the budget for the cost model. The only document you have that defines level of service is the one that says it has to do with the investment you've made in your park system per capita. Well, what happens is when the property values go up, all of a sudden the investment per capita goes up with absolutely no change in the level of service in terms of the potential annexation area. It would be different if it was a new development coming in and had never been served before, and they needed to pay an impact fee, for example, to account for their added burden on the system. But Klahanie has been in your system for a very long time, and your parks fund says that too. So because that number was so large and seemed kind of arbitrary, we didn't know what to do with it, so we laid it out as an issue, but did not include it in the cost. And that is certainly something we would encourage you to grapple with. We didn't mean to be running from it exactly, but just we feel like that's a policy question for all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, well, that's what I'm moving to now.
Could I put in one correction that I saw when I had a chance to look at my notes, and that's that your sales tax, you put 25% to your CIP.
It's 25, not 30.
And, well, you do put 30% away, but you put 25% to CIP and 5% to street.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but you still are in a kind of surplus situation.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, an opportunity for public comment. Is there anyone other than Dave Kapler who would? Dave, welcome.
David Kapler, 255 Southeast Andrews Street. The frustration that some of the numbers are just so big that we're going to ignore them is amazing. But Fall City Road, I couldn't believe it didn't come up till the very end tonight. 33% increase in population, and I didn't catch all the numbers, but the amount of FTE increase for 33% increase in population was 16%?
Or 16 FTE
16
positions.
out of whatever we have now, so I just don't think it's realistic. $61,000 for Klahanie Park. We didn't see a map tonight, but the city is always talking sustainability. We're talking about in 25 years, it's going to be the same boundary. It is just, Klahanie is the southeast part of Sammamish. It is a ridiculous thing to always be serving that forever in this screwball boundary that we would end up with. It's just so inefficient. Maybe it's sustainable dollar-wise, but it's just wrong. I think the EF and R issue is much bigger than it's been talked about either. I think Sammamish is gone, I think is from what I've been hearing from Sammamish people. Klahanie people are paying a lot more to District 10 than District, Klahanie is a profit center for District 10. District 10 is going to be mostly a rural fire department after they lose Klahanie. Their boundaries are all over. They got a whole bunch of land in between that doesn't produce any tax revenue. All the parks, forests, and all the rest. I think there's a lot of implications here with fire service for the city, for Sammamish, and for District 10 that have to be looked at too. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom?
My name is Tom Harmon, and I live in
Klahanie at 4369 243rd Avenue Southeast. And I just want to make just a few comments, maybe a few more at the meeting next week. What's important is a decision is made to annex or not to annex. The city council has the responsibility to do what's best for the citizens of Issaquah and who voted them in, and that's a big decision. The other thing is the citizens of Klahanie have to make a big decision also about their future. So certainly if I said anything tonight, it's been your policy to have an election. Let the people vote and do the best thing, you know. You might decide to do something else with the bond and in this part. But anyway, I think in my comments on the study is my feeling is the city of Sammamish was not represented on the task force. And I think it's relatively important because one of the things as the citizens that live up on the plateau, what about Sammamish? And maybe Sammamish may be a better fit for us and maybe a better fit for you, but it's not addressed at all in the study. The second thing is don't hurry this. I think you said your heads are already spinning from all these numbers going around and you're trying to get some agenda bill done in the next month or two. So, you know, give it a lot of thought. One other thing that seemed to be ignored, and that's utility services, predominantly water and sewer. Of course, we hear that it's Issaquah's policy that water and sewer be serviced by the city for the citizens of the city. But yet I read in the study that water and sewer service will be maintained like it was in the last election by the Sammamish Plateau Water and Sewer District. I'm speaking myself as a citizen, not having anything to do with the water district. But that's certainly, my question is, what about water rates? I haven't run my water numbers through that. Also, of course, fire concerns this as well. If the city of Sammamish pulls out of the fire agreement, that fire station that we rely on, which is almost across the street, right up the street, is that going to belong to the city of Sammamish and not be available? So there might be a fire station that may have to be provided or a police station that might have to be provided. So these additional costs out there may prove to be real. Issaquah Falls City Road, I think I suggested in a letter 3 or 4 years ago, to see if the state could take it as a highway. It moves cars out to Carnation and all sorts of places, and I think it'd be a good place, hopefully, and it doesn't look real good right now during state budget time, but the possibility is to look at it as not a county road, but a state, and that could probably help. Sammamish would like to 4-lane it all the way out to Trossachs, and that may be a possibility of it being more of a state artery. But anyway, I think 3 minutes. I don't know what my time is, but I think I pretty well said enough, and I hope it's been useful to you.
Thank you, Tom. Is there anyone else other than Connie who would like to speak?
Yeah, this is Connie Marsh again, and I'm actually going to ignore my address. The city is getting more complicated. We have a central Issaquah plan. We've grown and grown and grown, and now we're looking at adding yet another very large growth component to it with increased levels of service and changing in staffing. And what I do is I watch to see what people ask for. Yes, I can see your numbers. I don't agree with your numbers, especially parks, because I don't know that Dave and I can maintain all of Klahanie too, because we actually spend massive amounts of time trying to maintain our own city because our city is very underfunded in our maintenance for our parks. So I just think we are incredibly low in most of those estimates. Issaquah Falls City Road, yes. But then when I start thinking, what's next? Well, it's a long way away, and Brett is having a hard time with snow removal, and it's his responsibility, and now he needs a maintenance shop way out in Klahanie. And you know, the parks, they have to mow, and they don't have a parks facility in Klahanie. And on it goes, because we see that in every place that we take over, we end up doing more and more and more. And our staff grows and grows, and now they have to drive too far, and so now we need a satellite shop beyond the satellite shop. And all of a sudden, what we had known as Issaquah for quite some time, we have eroding levels of service as we spread our services further and further. And I think you do have to look at the quality of life for your existing residents as compared to saying, look, we could get more so we can increase our bonded indebtedness so we can spend more money so we can get more buildings and get more stuff. It's imperative to look at the quality of our town, not the size of our town. Governments tend to like to grow. The citizens don't necessarily like to grow as much as the governments do. It looks great on a resume when you increase the city size or you work in a larger size city, but that is not the intent of a community. And so then, boom, 10 years from now, the city of Issaquah is looking at Klahanie. Klahanie is saying, wow, we like the way we are, and we're looking at it saying, wow, you're a revenue source. What if we upzone Klahanie? Can we make that more multifamily? Maybe we need to make that more urban. Maybe we can redevelop their retail spaces, and we can have 6-story buildings in the Klahanie Shopping Center. Just think what revenues we can get from that. And so that's sort of the way the city is going. I'm not sure what kind of a planning effort we're going to have to try to figure out what we're going to do with Klahanie when we get it, and I didn't see that reflected in the studies either, because it does seem like the city of Issaquah just wants to grab more and make it bigger and more dense. And if I was in Klahanie, that would concern me. City of Sammamish, very suburban, it would keep its identity a little more intact. But we've got big eyeballs. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Connie. I'm guessing there is no one else in the audience. Stacy, any concluding comments?
I guess my concluding comments would be that we sort of got an overview tonight, and we have been looking at this for a few months, and I just wanted to add that the chapters are very detailed, and we have very much appreciated the presentations that we've gotten. The material is very easy to understand, and it's separate questions about whether you agree with the numbers or whether you have more questions about them. But it's been very easy to understand, and you all have been very accommodating, and we really appreciate that. I wanted to thank you for that. And I think I heard that in terms of process, we are moving forward with getting something 1st of June. And then agenda bill, and then we'll move on from there.
We will move on from there.
Right.
And so I think it was a little premature in the discussion about the agenda bill this evening. I didn't feel comfortable with that comment or with the discussion that we had, because it doesn't look like that the administration has had an opportunity to sort of figure that out, and we will be able to do that. So it is a work in progress. I'm not sure what we're talking about tomorrow night at Land and Shore, because it seemed like we had a pretty good discussion this evening, but I believe that's on the agenda.
It's not on.
It's not on the agenda.
Tomorrow.
So that's good. I think 2 nights in a row would be pretty tough on this topic.
Well, I was just going to say that agenda bill discussion, maybe substantively, maybe we weren't ready for that, but it is on our schedule.
It is for
that it would be coming to Land and Shore in June, and so in order for it to do that and have any kind of recommendation, it would need to be an agenda bill process. So to that extent, it's probably not. premature.
Good. Okay, so that will conclude this topic. Tom, Cynthia, thank you very, Trish, you're back there. You're going to be involved in this too. Okay.
We would like to say thank you to all of you. We really appreciate the opportunity to work with you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so our final item this evening is a request to chat a little bit about Eastside Fire and Rescue. And I see Deputy Chief Greg Tryon moving towards the microphone.
Yes, sir. I wanted to hand out a couple items so we can keep this very short and sweet. So, one more set. I appreciate you letting me share some time with you this evening. What I've handed out are I was asked, there's a new idea for funding the interlocal agreement that is Eastside Fire and Rescue that Issaquah is a part of. There is a plan in place, which is that Exhibit A, that 3-page or that 2-page thing. And that's an appendix to the ILA that says how Eastside Fire and Rescue is funded. There is a request to change the funding model for next year if it was approved by the Board of Directors of Eastside Fire and Rescue by the end of this month. That would provide money to the cities of Issaquah and Sammamish, which have the capability to support the other partners of Eastside Fire and Rescue. Because Issaquah has 3 fire stations in its jurisdiction, Sammamish has 3 fire stations in its jurisdiction, they're more often tasked to do what we call move-ups, to cover North Bend, Carnation, and these areas in between. Both North Bend, Fire District 38, which surrounds North Bend, and District 10, which protects Carnation, recognized that they couldn't cover their areas as effectively as we do now without the support of Issaquah and Sammamish. So the theory being is that they should support the costs that the cities of Issaquah and Sammamish bear. So when you look at this Excel spreadsheet that's here, that, I know, more numbers, really small, my apologies. There's 3 charts there. The top one is assessed valuation by each fire station, what it protects. The next one down, and this is something so it's a little easier to ponder and understand, is what each fire station covers. So if we imagine Station 71, which is right across the street here, 53% of that, the city of Issaquah pays for that roughly $2.1 million to have it ready to respond. The other 46% of it is Fire District 10, because this fire station right across the street protects out onto I-90, it protects Tiger Mountain, and some other areas that are unincorporated. So when you look at Station 71's costs, which are $2.1 million, 100% of it is covered by District 10 and the city of Issaquah. If you move to the right for Station 72, which is the Maple Street Station, a brand new Platinum Leads fire station, 91, almost 92% of that station is covered by the city of Issaquah costs because that's what it protects. But it also protects about another 8% of unincorporated or Fire District 10. So, and again, if you move to Station 73, you see that District 10 pays a little bit of the cost of that Highland station, and Issaquah picks up the majority of it. And then you could move all the way across and see the other 6 fire stations that make up Eastside Fire and Rescue. That final chart down says funding cost by station. Now you see the actual dollars that go into it. And that, what you'll notice, is $2.16 million per station per year is what it costs to fund each station, the 9 fire stations through Eastside Fire and Rescue. This funding model creates those percentages. So if you go to the right, and this is where I'll skip ahead so then you can ask whatever questions you want and we'll have the update. This is where the suggestion was, is that the cities of Issaquah and Sammamish should receive an offset from the partners who utilize your equipment to cover their gaps in service. And so what we see is that Issaquah would receive roughly $108,000, and the city of Sammamish would receive $108,000 rebate from the other partners. And how we do this is this allocation. We allocate it to the 2 other stations that are out, Carnation, which is 85, 87, which is out in North Bend. And the reason for that is because Sammamish and Issaquah don't pay into those 2 stations. So that's where the costs increased for the partners, i.e. District 10, District 38, and North Bend. So when you run all of that, at the end of the year, Issaquah's costs are going to be $108,000 less than they would have been otherwise without this funding formula. Sammamish's would be $108,000 less without this funding formula change. The partners had a meeting today. 4 of the partners, Sammamish wasn't there, had a discussion about this, and no action was taken on it. And so this has been a very active discussion amongst all the partners, whether is this the right thing to do. The discussion today sort of centered on, you know what, the funding model that we're currently using isn't going to work for everybody forever. We know that. So what we'd really like to do is find the best funding model, but we're going to have to start at the very beginning and put all assumptions aside so we can find out what the needs of the city of Issaquah are, Sammamish, North Bend, and the fire districts. But this potentially is a short-term 24-month system that could be in place to keep the partnership together, generally for everybody, i.e. the community of Eastside Fire and Rescue, not any individual partner, but lower their overall costs and maintain their service as it is today. Really confused you after Mr. Nesbitt's approach.
Well, no, I think I understand the bottom line there. Eileen, Joe, comments?
Well, I mean, the discussion today was, I mean, as we heard from a number of different people today, that if Klahanie moves forward, there definitely is going to be a big impact to District 10. And so this perhaps would give us that stopgap time to really go back and sort of throw everything away and come back and start to look at what would work with 10 and 38 is going to be impacted also. And there's still question on Sammamish. But at least this would give us 2 years that we understand that we would be able to maintain service, we'd be able to keep operating the way we have, and then continue to work on a long-term funding model. Joe?
Yeah, the only thing I'll throw out is that originally we were told that this all had to be done by May 30th. And the May 30th deadline is basically the board has the authority to make a decision by May 30th. Any decision after May 30th, it has to be all of the partners. So Eileen and I could make the decision for the council on our own by May 30th, but after May 30th, we'd have to poll the council, and the council would have to have the say-so. And the 4 members anyway felt like that was not a big issue because we're going to go to our council and get the information anyway. So the May 30th deadline has kind of moved down the road, and everybody kind of feels like that isn't as big an issue anymore. Now, all of these discussions that we've been having have been without Sammamish because we felt that the other 4 agencies were the ones that really needed to sit down and put something together, and Sammamish had said, this is what we want or else. And we needed to decide whether it was or else or not. So I think the main thing that the meeting was today was the chief's frustration of what's going to happen in the future and how committed are all of the partners to keep EFR together. And when the meeting was pretty much over, I think all of the partners that were there said, you know, whatever it takes, we need to be able to say we did everything we could to put it together, or, you know, we tried the best we could. You know, so I think the idea is the idea with the four agencies was, let's go ahead, put this out there for Sammamish with the idea that this isn't the end all. It's just, like Greg said, it's a stopgap, and take the next 2 years to look at what do we want Eastside Fire and Rescue to become, and then move towards that and have it hopefully build stronger to the point that all of the partners are actually partners instead of just sometimes partners.
And there's a lot of work that we still have. There's alternative, and you heard Mr. Nesbitt talk about there's different ways to fund this, whether it's AV, whether it's calls, where it's dwelling units and protection units, all these different things. And some of that stuff is going to take a Mr. Nesbitt type consultant to really be able to run all the permutations, and that's going to take time.
I had a question.
Yes, sir.
So there's 3 jurisdictions, 2 districts and 1 city that would be negatively impacted by this, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what's their perspective on it? Because it seems like when you have a partnership, you know, it works out great for 40% of the partners, but if I were on the other 60% end of that, I'd be looking at it going, I don't want to lose $110,000 for my constituents.
So part of all of this is the what-if game, meaning and I say this as an operational chief, the worst-case scenario for me is losing the city of Sammamish, because those are units that I can move around and protect the citizens with. If they were to leave and do their own thing, the city of Issaquah actually, at least in the short term, has a savings. And if they didn't do anything to make up the service deficit that would be for the Providence Point area, it's actually a really big savings. But at some point, you're going to have to make up that service. But District 10 has a big cost increase. North Bend, the city of, has a bigger cost increase than this is. And the same way with District 38. So, and if they tried to run their own fire department, when you look at North Bend, they are roughly spending, in this model, $777,000 for a fire station. But what we've just showed you is that in our model, it's $2.1 million. And if you go to some other fire departments, that's 2.2, 2.3, 2.5, in some cases $3+ million. So they feel that they're getting a bargain that they could not afford any other way, so they're willing to put some more money towards the partners who are, you know, help being a good partner, as you were pointing out.
That makes great sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bob, you sit in on this meeting today?
No, but this was the actual board, I believe. But I've been having discussions with our council reps and with Lonnie Wendell and the fire staff and where that, you know, if council wants to give some direction, previously have given some to our reps about the assessed valuation. You may want to give them some guidance on the other.
Well, I had requested that this come forward tonight for discussion because we were sort of looking at this May 31st deadline. And, you know, it didn't seem to be as a drastic of a deadline as it had previously. But since everyone was on the agenda and Greg was here, it would still be great to have sort of the head nod, because if it is something that would work for the 2 years, and it seems to perhaps be a easy process or easy model. I mean, it's already AV. It's a very simple, not simple. I mean, because there's a lot of, you know, some of our partners that will be incurring additional costs. But it is probably one of the possible funding models that might work and would coming back. And we just simply wanted to have sort of a head nod if this was in the right direction, if this is something that the council felt would be a possible solution for a short-time interim.
May I summarize what I understand this to mean then? So if this were adopted, then we'd have a lower cost of $108,000 for the next 2 years, and hopefully that would be enough runway so the existing partnership could reformulate a long-term plan, including Sammamish.
Correct.
With one proviso. Our rates are going to go up because 78 is moving. When they move, the percentages on Station 71 are going to change. So the 108 will be a relative change versus what our increases are going to be anyway.
Yes.
So don't look at the next 2 years as saving $200,000 because next year it's going to be $480,000 with a $100,000 savings, more or less. So.
Correct.
And then the other thing that needs to be said here is, in the meeting, a representative from Sammamish staff said that their council is entirely for staying with Eastside Fire and Rescue. But what is before the board right now is Sammamish has said, we want this funding model or we're going to walk. The rest of the board said, we like the funding model we've got. This is something that has come up since then. So this hasn't formally been presented to the city council at Sammamish. Sammamish could look at it and say, you know, this isn't going to help us at all. We're still not where we want to be, and they could still go.
And it still depends on who you talk to at Sammamish.
That's right.
I mean, it's all
Yeah.
the way like this.
It is.
The story is,
I guess for me, one of the frustrating things is trying to figure out what a majority of the Sammamish City Council really wants to do with respect to fire. And so while it sounds good that we've got 2 years to work on the funding model, how long have we been working on trying to address those concerns? I mean, it's been 4 years or more. I mean, they've never really been happy.
No, and I completely agree, and certainly this has been an amazing learning opportunity for me in the last year and a half in this position. What I do know that I've had the opportunity to learn is that what we do now won't work for the future. It's going to hit each partner badly at some point. And so regardless of who's part of the partnership, we will have to change what we do today. And not because what we do today is bad, it's just not going to work as the best thing for all the partners in the future.
And so, Joe, based on your comment, it sounds like there's been a change in direction. We had heard pretty...
I wouldn't say direction as maybe a change of heart. Everybody's going under the assumption right now, rightly or wrongly, the members that were there today are going under the assumption that Sammamish won't walk. They'll embrace this and look at the opportunity to move forward as something that will keep EFR together.
And there are some indications that that's true, that is the case?
There's indications, given history and stuff, the indications may be,
Yeah. Oh, well.
you know, it's no better or no worse than it has been, and we just don't know for sure. But I think that the decision today is based on the fact that the 4 participating members want to do everything they can to make sure that EFR's as whole as they can be. They don't want somebody pointing at them and say, you were the ones that caused the problems. And I think this is their way of saying, you know. And one other thing that I'll throw out, and I discussed with a couple of the people after the meeting, and I didn't get a chance to tell Eileen, is that they're not looking at this as a change of the funding model. They're looking at this as an ILA type thing, so that the funding model isn't modified. And making this part of it, it would be a separate agreement that everybody would look at, so that it wouldn't be a funding model change. And that's just something that was discussed rather than going through the formal procedure of a funding model change.
So would it extend the current ending date one more year?
No, it wouldn't. we'd still have the same timelines, which was identified by Mr. Nesbitt again, that in January, partners have to identify that they are getting out of the ILA in January. If February 1st comes around and they haven't made any decision, they automatically enroll for another 7 years in the ILA agreement.
So where does this 2 years come in?
Basically, it sets we know how the funding is going to work until the partners all agree on a different way if they choose to do it a different way.
Plus,
It
I
was
think
an
that-
up to 2
Up,
years.
correct.
I think the 2 years also gives the Klahanie annexation. We kind of figure it'll work within the 2
Sort of
years.
answer, that question will be answered
Right.
during that period.
For us and for 10.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
38 is, I mean, there's, as Greg said, that there is major issues for most all the partners coming in the near future.
Correct.
That need to be looked at.
Well, this seems like a good move forward. EFR hasn't gotten there for a vote, but you'll know soon whether Sammamish likes this or not, whether this changes everything, and regardless of what we do, the funding model is going to be looked at anyway, and so it seems to make sense to me. I'm looking around
What's the process for going to Sammamish? Is this something that the EFR board has to vote on first? Or what's the process then?
No.
Okay, I was going to say is that there is a meeting next Monday, which will have all of the partners, and the focus of that meeting is just to talk about this. So I think you would have certainly an indication, are all the partners comfortable with this? It still remains to be seen. If everybody at that meeting said, absolutely, let's do it, it could be done by the end of May, where then it just stays within the board of directors at EFR. If it goes past that, then it does need to come back to each council and commission to formally approve this thing. Or as Councilmember Faulkner was saying, is it going to be done as a side process versus changing LA? So I think I don't have a direct answer for you. It's still that up in the air.
And one of the other, if I could for a minute, one of the other things that District 10 is holding on to real strong is they're still the employer of record, and they want to get rid of that. And one of the Sammamish representatives at one of the board meetings said, we're not going to discuss that until the funding model is done. So District 10 is becoming of the mind, we're willing to work with them, we're willing to do anything we can, but we want to get out from underneath this. We need to move forward with a nonprofit or some sort of system where EFR is in charge of employees and not District 10. So that there's still some trade-offs here that some of the agencies want before this can actually move forward. And that's what the meeting next week is going to be, is a discussion of the finer points before it goes to an actual board meeting to be openly discussed at the board.
And that agenda bill for Issaquah will be coming forward within the next month or so for discussion.
June 3rd.
June 3rd is what the.
Yeah, and then it'll be referred.
And this is employer?
The employer.
Oh, okay. Okay. Does this help, Joe? I'm not hearing, Eileen, I'm not hearing anyone who's vehemently opposed to the suggestion.
I'm not opposed to finding solutions to problems.
Okay.
My concern continues to be what it was at the last meeting, and that is, I think we all want partners who want to be there. And and does it delay the inevitable? Does it actually solve a problem? And so I'd appreciate everybody working really hard on it, and I'm not opposed to it. But I also am concerned that it's just,
That's what we don't know, to be honest, because you have a majority of their board that's up for election. That might change things. And it might be that the other partners have to look at doing something different, because the city of Sammamish believes in being a contract city. And so it's been hard for them to feel like a partner, because that's not how they approach anything. They want a menu-driven, and we've really pushed back, at least at Eastside, saying, no, 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 you're a partner, whether you like it or not, and that's created a lot of tension. And maybe we need to change how we approach sometimes, so we can still maintain a regional approach, but I don't exactly know what that is yet.
Sure.
So.
Well, they would like two-person crews. They would like two-person crews. They'd like to be a little bit different. But it's a topic for another time. I think, Joe and Eileen, you've got what you need. Is there any other business before we adjourn? We're adjourned then.